All right, so the first thing we're talking about today is props masters or property masters. This stuff comes from masterclass.com. They have a whole article about prop master stuff. Prop masters are the head of the props department, or they're a senior position in the art department. So if they don't really have a separate props department in that film because of the budget, if it's a smaller budgeted film, they might just call it the art department. But the props master will be a senior position within that art department. Or they'll have their own separate props department, depending on how many crew are underneath them and how many people they need and how many props they need to make. They're in charge of all of the props in a production. They either acquire them, and they keep them organized, and they make sure that they are safe to use. Make sure that they're not going to hurt anybody, that kind of thing. They lead a team of props makers and prop department runners. Prop makers are the ones who are going to actually make the props if they have to make it from scratch. And prop runners are going to go and rent them out or buy them or go to the thing and pick up anything that the props department will need, or like the production assistants in the props department. The props master reports to the production designer. They read through the script and create a properties list or a props list, which looks like this, and they fill out everything, kind of like how the costume designer fills it out for the costumes. The props master will be filling it out for the props. What props do we need? What's under our department and what goes to somebody else? And when does it appear in the script? Which scene? When are we going to need it? And how many are we going to need? And they also have to think about the props that are going to be needed that aren't in the script. Just like with a costume designer, how they have to figure out what kind of costume this character wears. The props master will have to figure out what kind of props might this person be carrying around. What kind of items do they like to mess with? Something like Inception with the top that spins, that's clearly going to be in the script. But something else that's just like on somebody's belt or something that they carry around with them, that's not a story element and it's not like focused on, that could be the props master just decided that maybe they carry around a chain, on their belt or something. And so that'll be them to figure out.
So if it's like a practicality choice or a personality choice.
Yeah, like if it's not specifically.
Oh, it's not in the script, but it makes sense, or this just would match this specific scene or this specific job role.
Right. And so then they'll have those. If it's not specifically in the script, they'll figure out what else does this character need? What would help illustrate their character more with some kind of item that they handle or carry around. The props masters have meetings with various other crew, like set decorators, set dressers, costume designers, and more to figure out what props are needed. They'll also hash out who's responsible for what. So if a character wears jewelry, is that going to be on the props master or the costume designer? What about a pocket watch that's attached to their pants by a chain? Is that going to be the costumes or props? Or maybe a curtain that the actor goes over and kind of just messes with by brushing it aside to look out the window? Is that going to be set decorating or props? They'll put one of the crew departments over each of these to ensure everyone knows what their job is and what they need to be responsible for. Typically, anything that an actor touches is going to be under the props department. So if they did touch a curtain, that would be under props. If they do handle that pocket watch at any point, touch it, move it around, that won't be on costumes, that'll be on props. But each production's a little different, and that's why they have those meetings, just to hash out, make sure everybody's on the same page. Nobody in props is thinking that, the costume department will handle that, or vice versa, so that nothing's left out. They hash out everything and figure out who's responsible for what, make sure everything is there when they need it. On larger sets, props masters are going to have that team of props makers, but on smaller sets, they're usually the ones that are going to either be making them, renting them out, or buying all the props themselves. They have to also get it all within a budget that they are given or that they create. including backups in case something gets lost or broken. So if something's really important, they definitely need to make sure they have multiples of it. If it gets broken, scratched, something continuity-wise messes up, they have a backup that they can replace it with. On sets that can't afford to hire what's called an animal vendor, they're the ones who usually take care of the animals, make sure they're eating and that they're safe and cleaning up after them. But if the set can't afford that, the props master is usually the one that's going to be tasked with taking care of them whenever the animals appear in the production. So any animal actors, pretty much, they're the ones who watch over them if there's no animal vendor on set.
You mean wrangler?
It's either wrangler or vendor. I think it might be two different jobs, but they said
I never
animal
heard
vendor.
the term vendor. That's interesting.
I've heard of it vendor twice now, so I think it's either the same thing or it's something separate. But I thought it was animal wrangler as well. I think
I thought
animal wrangler might be the trainers, the ones who are actually getting them to react, while the vendors are the ones who take care of them.
Because when I heard animal,
but I'm not sure.
Because when I heard animal vendor, I just thought, oh, where you get the animal from? Like there's like a special place that they take care of them, and they're specifically trained for TV and movies and stuff like that.
That could be it. And they could be the ones that they might come on set to make sure the animal's not behaving incorrectly. But
yeah,
we'd have to look more into that to find out the specific differences between a wrangler and a vendor.
I was just curious because what you understood from that, because that's what I got from it.
Yeah, that's what I got from it too. On large sets, they often also have what's called a food stylist for any scenes with food in it, or any scenes that the actors are going to have to actually eat. But on smaller sets, this task will also be passed to the props master. So when they can't afford a food stylist or they just didn't hire one, props master is going to be the one handling the food styling, which is going to make it look as best as it can, or make sure that it's looks good, but also edible if the actors have to actually put it in their mouth or eat it or whatever. But for the majority of the food on a dinner scene, they don't actually touch it. They just leave it set up on the table to make it look nice. As you can see, they're kind of like painting this turkey to make it look more shiny and cooked. Props masters have to have firearms training and certification. So they're the ones that are making sure that the firearms are safe, that they're properly handled, and they're usually the ones that are making sure you might have a firearm specialist or somebody else who's on set to ensure the safety of it as well. But the props master needs to have firearms training and certification just in case that other person's not on set. And they make sure that it doesn't have any live ammunition, or if it does have live ammunition, it is safe to handle and nobody's basically playing around with it when they shouldn't be, and they'll have it on lockdown for the most part. But they should anyway. All right, and this other stuff comes from screenskills.com. Prop masters usually begin working about a few weeks before shooting begins, so they might not be hired on as early as some of the other people. It depends on the production and depends on how many props need to be made, but typically speaking, they'll be hired on a few weeks beforehand because most films don't require a huge, vast majority of props. But you'd be surprised how many props are in a film, but some productions obviously have a lot more than others. If you have any war movies that have weapons and things like that, they're obviously going to need a lot more props than something that's just like a romantic comedy or something like that. They're the props masters are the ones who decide if the props need to be bought or rented, or if they need to be created from scratch. Once filming is done, they return all rented props to whoever they rented them from, and they organize the sale of or disposal of everything else. So after production's done, they don't need these props anymore. They try to sell them to get as much money back for the production as possible. If they can't sell them, they figure out how to dispose of them the cheapest way. This stuff comes from studiobinder.com. So props are any inanimate objects that an actor interacts with. So it's going to be anything the actor touches, moves around, carries with them, anything like that. If they're touching it, if they're handling it at all, it falls, most of the time it falls under props. Props can help further the story, as in like in the Matrix, it's either the red pill or the blue pill. Whichever one he picks up, he's either going to stay in the Matrix or he's going to see the reality. And so he's actually physically, the story is moved along by him picking up one of those two props. The One Ring in Lord of the Rings, obviously that clearly moves the story along, and it's the central theme in the movie as well. Props can help define a character, like Indiana Jones with his whip, or Captain America with his shield. They can also help a show or theme. They can also help show a theme or concept, like Inception with the top, spinning top. It helps show whether they are in a dream state or whether it is reality or not. Or the One Ring symbolizing greed for power. So they can show a concept or a theme just in how central they are to the story and how much attention is given to them, I guess, in the script itself. Props can be hand props, which are any props that are carried or handled by an actor, like weapons, flashlights, obviously Lord of the Rings, the One Ring anyway, the Golden Ticket and Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and other things like that. Anything that they hold in their hands or carry with them in their hands are called hand props. And there's also personal props. Personal props could be anything that is worn by an actor or carried with them consistently. So if you don't, you'll never see this character without their briefcase, or you'll never see them without their clipboard or their golden necklace or whatever they're carrying with them. And it's kind of like iconic, and it kind of, you can pick out one of the elements and say that belongs to this character. The whip for Indiana Jones, it makes his character a little bit more dynamic and a little bit more, sets him apart. So that would be a personal prop. Then there's what's called set props. Set props are kind of like set dressing. They add to the aesthetic of the set. However, unlike set dressing, actors interact with set props. So this could be some mail that they finger through to try to find a letter or something in the mail that came in. It could be some clothes in the drawer if they're shuffling around the clothes and trying to find something in their drawer. Or it could be a couch or a chair that they actually sit in. So it could be furniture that the actors actually use. While the set dressing is going to be the stuff that is in the scene, but it's not stuff that they actually sit on or interact with. It's just going to be there in the background or foreground. The set props are going to be the stuff that the actors actually sit in, lay down on, or interact with within the set. And then there are trim props, which is any prop that hangs on a wall that the actor interacts with. That could be like a picture frame. If it's crooked and the actor goes over to, or the character, I guess, goes over to the picture to straighten it out. Or it could be the blinds on a window or the curtain, like in the picture. So if they're moving the curtain out of the way, that typically would fall to the props department, because that's something the actor actually moves around. So they need to make sure it's safe. It's not going to fall down on their head when they move it out of the way, because it's actually set up to be moved. Those are called trim props. I guess I don't have a picture of this, but there's also what's called breakaway props, which are items that are made extremely brittle so that they can break away on cue or impact and shatter easily. It could be like bottles, plates, and more. Window sills and stuff like that can be breakaway. So if the actor breaks through it, the props department's over that, make sure that it's good to do, it's safe, and that nobody's going to get hurt. It's not real glass, that kind of thing. So they have to actually make a vast majority of those. The breakaway stuff, if they have to break it in scene, they have to make a lot so that they can do any for backups in case one accidentally breaks, because they're very brittle. You could squeeze it and it would break. And so because of that, they have to have extra ones just in case it's has too much pressure put on it. They also have to make sure that however many takes they have to redo, they have enough for those takes to be done. So if they have, they might need, this director likes to do 6 takes usually or something, or 3 takes. And they might do like 6 or 7 extras just in case he wants to go over, feels like he still didn't get the scene. And they'll probably talk to the director to figure out like, how many extras do we need? Props, the art department, the production designer, they might talk to them as well and be like, how many extras are we gonna have to make of this? Just to make sure that they have enough for the scene so that they don't run out. Any prop can become a hand prop if the actor starts carrying it. So like the wall painting, it starts out as a trim prop because it's hanging on the wall, they're going over to it, messing with it. But if in the scene they end up picking it up and carrying it to another room to show somebody the picture, then it can become a hand prop because now it's being held in their hands. So that's just you ever hear those different terms, that's just what they mean. This stuff comes from Insider. It is the video, it's the first video in under props in the syllabus, how fake drugs are made for movies. It's actually really interesting. I found this one really cool. The video shows how fake drugs are made for scenes. Like in Breaking Bad, they actually use rock candy for the meth. And for weed in films and TV shows and things, they usually use a cannabis strain that lacks THC. So it's not actually having that stuff that's going to make you high, but it still smokes like weed. For heroin, it might be pancake mix and cocoa powder. And when the heroin needs to be heated up in the spoon, here's the rock candy, like the meth. And then when heroin needs to be heated up in the spoon, it starts bubbling. That typically is going to be something like brown sugar and water, so it can get that bubbling effect, but have the right color. They said the main thing about fake drugs is just making sure they interact realistically without being dangerous for the actor.
Yeah, because they can make you sick. No, some of them, if you have to do multiple scenes, can still make you sick too. So even if you have to like fake it, like with the Daenerys scene, that one's the one that sticks out the most to me because I don't really watch a lot of shows with drugs. But I remember she had to eat like the horse's heart, and they had it was made of a bunch of gummy, I think it was like gummy bears and corn syrup, stuff like that. And she had to take multiple scenes biting into it, and she was actually got sick at the end. Like her acting was pretty genuine because she was so nauseous and sick from having to eat, like bite into such a sugary thing multiple times, and it was
there
so
it
gross.
Is. So it was supposed to be a heart, but it was actually like a lot of, like she said, jelly beans and other stuff. So when she was eating it, it's really sweet. And if you have to do take after take after take, and she's actually putting it in her mouth and swallowing some of it, I'm sure it starts to, it can start to upset your stomach, which is why they also need to make sure that it's safe to eat, which that is safe to eat. But you have to also be aware of like how many takes this is going to have to take to do, and make it look realistic enough to where it will come across to the audience as the heart instead of like something, instead of something completely fake. And so it either, some people will buy it, some people won't, or everyone will buy it. And if everyone buys it, then you did the job right. Half and half, still probably did your job right. It's just people were looking at it really closely. And if nobody believes it, then you probably didn't do a good job at making that product.
And most of the time it doesn't have to, when it comes to those kinds of things, it doesn't have to look super duper realistic unless it's like specific for the show or something, like especially drugs, it has to be like a little heavier. So if they want to be graphic, they kind of have to make it look somewhat realistic, I suppose. But it doesn't have to look perfect unless it's a specific show about it or a specific thing. For me, I would prefer it a little less realistic because it would make me feel less queasy. But for what they're trying to go for, you know, the realism and the hitting a harder punch in the story, yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
If it's not the main focus of your story, it's just like a tiny thing. It doesn't have to be super uber realistic, I would imagine, but it's still good that you can try as hard as you can to get it as realistic as possible.
And so with the fake cocaine, because that is actually injected by the actors, most of the time they're actually snorting it up their nose. They have to make sure, they have to try to make it as safe to ingest as possible. In the video, they showed that they used some kind of powder. I don't know what the name of it was, but if you watch the video, you'll see, you can find the actual name of it, which doesn't cause any problems with your, with anything with your nose, your nasal, what's it called? What's the name of it? Basically, it doesn't cause any problems with your nose. However, Jonah Hill was talking about it in a interview about when he was in Wolf of Wall Street. They were snorting so much of the fake cocaine in that movie that he had intestinal problems later that he had to go to a doctor for because of all that fake cocaine. So even if it's safe to use, because they were ingesting so much of it, it still causes problems. So that is,
which is crazy to me, because like when you told me that, I was trying to think back to the movie, and there were like a few scenes, but most of it was just lewds. So I was like quaaludes. So I was like, did I just block it out? Or was it just maybe rehearsals? Because I remember a few scenes, but not that many. But if you're rehearsing and you're doing multiple takes, I would imagine, yeah, you'd have to do it more. Because Jonah himself, I didn't see using a lot. I saw Leonardo DiCaprio using it.
Right. But you also have to think about retakes and,
yeah, exactly.
How many different angles are they getting that shot with?
It is. It's a really great movie. It's one of the few that I can watch that has that kind of thing, and because it's such a great movie.
But yeah, so the props masters have to try their hardest to make it look realistic as possible, but make sure it's safe, especially if it has to be eaten or injected by the actors. Now with stuff like with heroin, and when they have it in the what is it called? The syringes, it's actually going to be a retractable syringe. And when it's injected into the actor's skin, what it's really doing is it's just retracting the needle back up into itself. And when you're pushing down in the thing, it's hiding the liquid up into itself. So it looks like the liquid's getting injected. It looks like the needle's going into the skin. But really, they just use two syringes, one that's real, so that it's like making the indentation in the actor's arm. And then when they are showing the quote unquote injection, they'll switch out the syringe with one that's retractable. So it looks like the liquid is going into their
and from what it sounded like, they also use the same for like medical shows as well, when they have to do like blood transfusions. There's like a fake blood one. I looked it up, and there is actually like, you have like a red liquid, and it does a similar thing to make it look like it's like they're removing blood.
Yeah, it does it in reverse. So all it does is it just hides. It basically has an outer layer that looks like it's see-through, but really it's not. And it's just hiding the liquid inside itself. And when you're drawing blood, it just does the opposite. You just pull it and it reveals the liquid. So it looks like it's pumping into there.
So it's used for, drug stuff, but also medical dramas. I saw use them a lot, along with like the fake, like the, to make it look like they have like stuff on their arm when they are in the hospital, that kind of thing.
Oh yeah, the IV.
Yeah, the IV. So they use those for that as well.
Yeah. So those are some ways that they do it. They have to make sure that, again, they have to make sure that it's reacting realistically as a drug would, and they have to make sure that it looks realistically, the consistency, how thick it is, how it moves, how it reacts to heat, with
which is a very
heroin anyway.
interesting job because
And that the
way that I
color is
was-
very real too. But go ahead, what?
which is a very interesting job. I would imagine like they probably need like a cop expert or someone who has knowledge in drugs to like, nope, doesn't look realistic enough. See,
Hopefully
like,
that's hopefully.
yeah,
Hopefully they
it
need
is.
somebody to show them what it looks like.
Yeah, and it's
Otherwise,
someone's just like, oh, I've done this a lot. It's not like, it's like, okay.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's what's usually happening when you're seeing anything like that. It doesn't always have to be rock candy for, you know, crystallized meth, but that's what Breaking Bad used, some of the light blue one. And there's other things that different props masters will use in different things to make it realistic, but make it safe to either ingest or just to interact with for the actors.
I would imagine, I don't know a lot about meth, obviously, or chemistry, but I do remember, like, in the show, they were saying, the bit of it that I could watch, they were saying that that he created like a new strand and it was blue because of some like chemical component or whatever. And so I would imagine for the writers, that could have been also like a bit of a story loophole so that they didn't have to constantly like maybe dye the rock sugar, or maybe the blue was cheap or something like that, to where they could get away with no. One second.
I don't know, because
One
like
second.
there's also
One second. What?
I'm gonna mute you. There's also white rock candy, so maybe it just didn't look realistic enough. It looked too
Oh
opaque.
no, I know. David just corrected me because he watched the whole show. He said it was basically their mark was that it was blue or something, but I remember him saying it was part of a chemical thing, but whatever. Basically all I'm saying is it could have been also, you know, maybe a way to make it to make them be able to use the blue rock candy and not have it look too fake, maybe.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry, honey, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just trying to hear David and you at the same time.
Gotcha.
He's
Well, yeah,
correcting
so it
me.
also depends on how often these are going to be used. Obviously, Breaking Bad, you know, he's making meth. So the whole thing is like he needs to consistently be having something that looks like it over and over again. Whereas if you just have maybe one scene of it, you might do, you know, if you're doing cocaine, you might do that powder stuff that they were talking about. You might do, if they're just tasting it on their tongue, saying, oh yeah, this is good stuff. You know, they might do powdered sugar. They might do something that looks like it, but isn't exactly what it is, and is still easily ingestible, depending on how many scenes they're doing. I'm
You
sure
could
they
also do
change
something
it
where
around.
it looks realistic, but you don't have to show them injecting it or inhaling it, inhalating or whatever it's called. When you do, I think it's inhaling. You can also like cut to it. You have something that looks realistic. It doesn't have to, like, you don't have to zoom in too close, but just looks realistic enough to where you can get your shot, and then you can do a quick cutaway so that the person's not looking at it for too long and they're like, it looks kind of fake or something like that.
Last thing I'll say about with that is with the fake cocaine thing, they did show in the video. I really recommend watching that video because it's really interesting. But they showed like there was like a small thin tube that they might sometimes use. They say it's not really that often used because it doesn't look realistic enough. It doesn't react the same way that somebody's actually snorting it would. And if they're snorting it, they just have a better reaction of how it would actually be. So it gives a more realistic movement and everything to the actor. But if they really don't want to ingest anything, then sometimes they might use like a small little tube that has some kind of suction, and they'll hide that within like a dollar bill or something, so that when they're snorting the cocaine, it is actually just going up into a tube, kind of like a vacuum thing. So there's different ways to do it, but the prop master is going to be the one to figure out how to do it, what to make that stuff out of, and make sure that it's safe to use and that no real drugs are actually on set, because obviously it's illegal.
But I always wondered about that, especially with like smoking cigarettes on screen and stuff. I was always like, they don't really smoke, right? Because I know that some people do, like back then especially, like they just actually smoke the cigarette or smoke weed or whatever. But it was always like, man, if the whole movie they're smoking, like I remember watching Sex and the City, and Carrie in the first few seasons constantly had a cigarette. And I was like, holy crap, if she has to actually smoke that constantly in multiple takes and multiple shoots for the show, her lungs must be horrible. Like her poor thing. But knowing kind of how it works, it is really interesting to me, because that was always one of the things that I'd always wonder, like, oh my gosh, they have to do this so many times for takes and stuff. I wonder what they really use, or if they actually have to do it.
Yeah, and typically with like cigarettes and things like that, they'll use something that doesn't have any nicotine or any drug in it, but still reacts as those things would. Kind of like the weed thing with just this cannabis strain that doesn't actually have any THC in it. They'll use that so that there's no actual drugs that are going to make somebody high, but it's still, the smoke is still the density and reacts the way that actual weed would. So they try to find that balance between like realism and safety. But and it's more recent too, because even back in, I think they were talking about Scarface, they said that the guy was doing so much fake cocaine, but it wasn't the same stuff they use now. And he had like serious issues with his nose, like he couldn't breathe out of one side of his nose or something after the movie. And
That's committing right there.
It like actually messed him up because he was taking so much of that fake stuff, and it actually affected him later. So that's why the props master should be safe above all else. Realism should not be over safety when it comes to inhaling or pretending to do any of that type of stuff.
Also, older films, you can also tell way more when they're faking the smoking and when they're not, because you don't see any smoke, or you see like a tiny bit, like someone lit it real quick and then just moved it. It's a lot easier.
Smoking is not popular anymore, right? I haven't, like, it used to be a lot more popular than it is now. I don't think there's not as many movies and shows that do smoking as much as there used to be.
Yeah,
Unless it's based back then they definitely overdo it. But
yeah, like early 2000s and 90s movie, especially 90s and early 2000s, had a lot of it and a lot of scenes like that. And so I just remember watching it, especially younger, and noticing, like, even as a young kid, even not like knowing a lot about it, like I could tell when they were actually, like, it looked realistic, like they were actually smoking it, and when it looked like they were just totally not smoking it at all, and they were just like putting it to their mouths and then moving it, it was way more obvious and easy to tell.
B said, I wonder if cutting away could drastically change the content rating. I think so. For drugs, I think, because it's just not, now it's implied instead of shown. It's the same way for violence. If the violence is implied that he's squishing his head, but instead we're cutting away.
It goes from PG-13 to rated R. Yeah. I mean, rated R to PG-13.
I think the same applies for drugs. It's like they're implying that they're taking drugs, but they're not actually showing it, or they're not showing the, inhaling it and whatever else, or injecting it into themselves.
For example, there's a movie, David, is Archive 81, is it considered MA or is it just PG-13? All I know is that me and my brother finished watching a show called Archive 81. Please watch it. It's really good. It's canceled, unfortunately, but it's really good. And they have a lot of cussing, like a lot of F-bombs. Holy crap. But they don't have like they don't show, use of implied drug use or like the content warnings, even though they do talk about these people, certain people that are high or are on drugs or something like that. They talk about it and they show like a person that seems to be tweaked out on something, but it doesn't have the content warning because they don't go graphic with it. They just imply that they're hawked up on something and the person's a little squeamish, a little tweakish, so I didn't, because they always have the content warnings on Netflix, like, oh, this and that, and I didn't see any talking about drug use at all because they were more subtle with it.
Yeah, and I think it also depends on like when you're cutting away, clearly, like if they're pretty much inhaling it at that point where you're cutting away before they breathe it out, then that's up to the ratings. I think it's ratings agency that decides that. TV, I know they definitely try to like walk the line of what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do a lot of the time for broadcast and cable. But with streaming services and stuff, I'm not sure how strict they are compared to the others, but I know broadcast used to be very strict on what they allowed and what they not, because they were trying to get to the widest audience possible. So they
I was
didn't
gonna
want to
say,
offend anyone.
it probably depends on the drug, obviously. And it probably depends on how graphic you get. Because I know that in many sitcoms and stuff like that, they imply drinking, they imply sex a lot, like even some more graphic stuff. Like I was joking with Coda a few months ago about, I was rewatching How I Met Your Mother, and I was like, the amount of really dirty jokes that they managed to squeeze in just because of the innuendos, it's insane that they still have a PG rating. But like, I really think it depends on the subtlety and it depends on the drug, because if it's just weed, I feel like maybe not, maybe it can be a little PG-13, but if it's something a little heavier, that might be a little more graphic. Even if you don't show it, the implications might still be a little heavier. So that's just my opinion.
Via, so why don't they put some kind of filter over the nose, like for when people use $100 bills? LOL, maybe it won't work, I don't know. Yeah, I think that wouldn't work, because usually when they're showing them, like for cocaine, when they're showing them like cutting the little lines and inhaling it or snorting it up their nose, we usually see their nose right after that, and they have like a little bit of white and it's like kind of red. And that's more like a realistic reaction and look to it than it would be if there was some kind of filter, because then they'd have to do a weird cut before the stuff starts falling back out of their nose. So I think it
would take you out of it,
but I feel like the reason they try to get as realistic as possible, which I think Brian was talking about this at one point, but that's why they use live ammunition sometimes, even though it's extremely dangerous. They just like as realistic as possible. So they try to get it as real as it can be without it, but they still try to be as safe as they can with it.
There's definitely an argument to the fact that it's not always necessary. I feel like I've seen a lot of really good movies that handle really heavy subject matter, such as addiction, such as sexual assault and stuff like that. And they imply it really well to where it still gets the point across, but doesn't have to be super graphic, doesn't have to like show you the entire thing, you know? And so I really do think that it depends on, you know, if you can hit the same note with implying how you imply it, like using your creativity, and also if it's necessary at the end of the day. Because yeah, it's cool, yeah, it's edgy, but does it serve your story? And that's always, story is key, right? So at the end of the day, that's always something we should consider. Okay, yes, this would like give it a level up, make it look more professional, make it be cooler, you know, gritty, but does it really serve the story? Is it necessary? Can we tell them?
I would say yes, if you're trying to show them. So again, safety always should be above realism. You know, that should never have it be less safe because you want it to be more real. Like if it's gonna affect safety, then no, safety should always be above realism. So do everything you can to keep everybody safe. But if you're gonna actually show them doing it, not everybody wants to just imply it. Some people want to show it and make it more impactful that way. And sometimes it will be more impactful actually showing it if it's done well. And so
no, yeah, that's why I meant
shooting a gun, snorting drugs, injecting yourself with drugs, like the reactions of the actor's skin, their nose, whatever, it's all going to be very different for the actual real thing compared to anything that they are pretending to do. So to try to get it to be as realistic as possible, they try to do it as safely as they can, but get it as close to the real thing as they can do without it being illegal or affecting safety.
I'm just saying that sometimes it's for shock value or to be a little, you know, to be grittier. And yes, sometimes it is necessary. Sometimes it is, you know, you have to show the reality, and the reality's ugly. And that's just, if that's a story you want to tell, that's perfectly fine and sometimes even helpful, you know, necessary. I'm just saying that it's a choice, and I feel like Hollywood is going very much in the everything needs to be as realistic as humanly possible in movies, and that's not always the case. I feel like subtlety can still give an impact depending on what it is, obviously, depending on what it is, and that's just my opinion.
And so that would, so whatever production, that's going to end up being conversation with the producer, the director, and the props master to figure out, how realistic do we need to make this? Can we do this? Would you be able to cut away? And then you have to figure out based on what the director or the producer
would
wants.
it give the same impact when you watch it back? Yeah. Same emotion you want to get.
And it also depends on how often it's in the show. Something like Breaking Bad, you couldn't show them making meth and just keep implying it over and over again. Like eventually you need to show it, I would say. Like you can't, it's going to be very not as impactful. It's going to be more weak if you just kind of show it, but always you're, showing the corner of the room when they actually do anything. So it really depends
I feel like
on
older
the
shows
writing,
did
the
that a
show,
lot.
and what it's about, or the film, how often they're doing these things, and how central it is to the story, I would say.
And I feel like it depends on the topic. I feel like you can imply murder a lot easier than you can imply drug use.
Maybe.
Maybe,
but then again, it's not as impactful sometimes. So it just depends. It depends. I would say like it depends on what you're going for and what you feel like you need to do. And of course, there are ways to imply things, and then there are ways to show it and make it as real as possible without it being a danger. And so you just have to figure out which way you're going with your thing and what rating you are trying to go for and all of that to figure out what to do.
No, I totally agree. I just wanted to make that point. I wasn't saying like, oh, it's never necessary, or oh, it's exaggerated all the time. No, like obviously I know that sometimes that's necessary. Life is ugly, life is real. I just mean that sometimes I've seen it done really well, like in Precious, for example, where they, do child abuse and sexual abuse, that kind of thing. And it's done really like it's not as graphic, and it still hits you, and it's still hard to watch, and it's still painful, and it's not as graphic. So I think it really depends on the subject matter. I think it depends on how you build the scene, and sometimes you can't escape it. Sometimes it is going to be necessary, but sometimes subtlety isn't always. You're not always going to lose realism or the impact if you're not as graphic and as like realistic as possible. Sometimes
it depends on how it's done. So
but
so again, going back to it about props, it's with the prop drugs, prop guns, those things are slight subtle movements that you don't really realize until it's not there. And so then you realize like that doesn't look real. It looks like he's, wow, he cocked it back way too far when he shot, or he didn't cock it back enough if he's using that gun, whatever else. So if they're actually shooting the thing, safely, then they're just going to have the most realistic reaction. They don't need to pretend, because you can't pretend these little subtle movements in your shoulder and your hand.
Or how you're holding the gun completely wrong and then you shoot. Oh gosh, that's
well, yeah, if you ever do any kind of weapons, you should always have some kind of weapons training for the actor if they're holding any kind of sword.
At least teach them how to hold it. Yeah, at least teach them how
to need to know how to actually move it around and stuff.
So Vish said like an artificial arm. I don't know if it would look as realistic, because artificial arms, if you look at them too closely, can't you tell that they're not real? I don't know. Maybe if they do it really well.
Yeah, and again, that could probably be done. It would just have to be discussed with props, and it would just be discussed. Probably they would add some CGI now. Like they wouldn't just use an artificial arm. They'd also do something with CGI, I'm sure, if they have the budget for it, because CGI is just everywhere now. So they'll help enhance it later in post. So they would talk to everybody about that. Basically, it's just figuring out all of these different elements to see what can we get away with, what do we need to do, how close is this going to be in camera, how many of them do we need, how many backups and things like that do we need, and how are we handling this? And they'll have all those meetings to figure out what kind of prop to make, what to make it out of, and how realistic they have to make it, and figure out ways around the safety issues of actually using real props, real items, things like that. All right, so moving on from that, we have letter B in the syllabus. It's how noiseless props are made for movies and TV shows. That one, again, it comes from Insider. And they showed how this guy was making these props and he was making them silent. Because one thing that you might not think about when you're first just picking up a grocery bag for your film, a grocery bag for your film is like a paper bag, how noisy it is. It makes a lot of noise when you move it around. Any slight, subtle movements, if you squish it against your chest when you're carrying it, it's a lot of noise. So what he did was he was making identical looking or close enough looking props to the real thing, but he was making them out of different materials that are more durable, more sturdy, and they're not as noisy. So things like plastic, the plastic saran wrap stuff that goes around, not saran wrap, but the whatever you call it, the stuff that goes around like the flowers, it's like that thin plastic, it makes a bunch of noise. And so he made it out of a different material to make it much more quiet, barely make any noise when they were squeezing it, touching it, handling it. So if it's a Valentine's Day scene or if it's a birthday or something and they're giving flowers to the person that they like or love or their mom, then it won't be making a huge amount of noise for the sound department. So that's another thing that props masters have to think about is, if they're handling these props, how noisy is it going to be for sound? And that's something that a lot of them typically don't think about as much because they're just trying to get it to be as realistic as possible. But if they can, try to make it silent because it'll just get the location sound to be a lot cleaner and a lot easier to use, so you don't have to do ADR in post-production.
Definitely make the sound department's job a lot easier.
Yeah, so he changed things like bags, plastic, paper. Paper makes a lot of noise when it's all crunched up. If they're throwing away an idea, they're writing it out, all that's going to make a lot of noise. So he made like identical ones that was a lot. It looked the same, but it didn't sound the same. Ice cubes, he made like, it wasn't anything real. It was, what is it called? Silicone. He made like some translucent silicone that looked like ice cubes, but it was obviously very quiet because it's kind of like rubber. And so when it was poured into the cup, it didn't make any noise. And then they can replace those with real ice cubes for the actor to actually drink. But they try to get it to be, he was trying to get it to be as silent as possible for all these different props that you don't really notice they make a lot of noise, but the sound department is going to tell because all of these props are held right near the mics because they're usually mics, lapel mics attached to the actor somewhere on their clothing.
And the ADR will probably complete, like for example, the ice cubes. It might need a little noise because you're putting ice in water. So it'd be weird if it had no noise. So then the ADR department would probably like just put a subtle, quiet noise sound of the bag or the ice and add it later.
Foley department would do that, but yeah.
Foley, sorry. Foley.
But yeah, so they would sound department would post-production sound would add in the sound effects so that they don't have to, because you don't ever really want to capture them on set anyway. They're not going to sound as clean and they're not going to work as well, and you can't control how loud or quiet they are. So you want things to be as silent as possible. And that's why they talk about like when actors are having a plate of food in front of them, if they're not showing the close-up of the knife and the fork on the plate, then they try to get the actors to just kind of move their hands, making it look like they're getting the plate, but they're not actually scraping their utensils against it because it's going to make a lot of noise for sound. So just those small little details that a props master might be able to do to help out another department is always good to have like somebody who's trying to collaborate with all the other people because they know how hard it can be to capture clean dialogue when there's a little element that's making a lot of noise and interrupting it. And this stuff comes from letter D. Film art department hacks is from Crimson Engine. He talks about for smaller productions and independent productions, you might find that it's cheaper to buy your props off of Amazon or eBay instead of renting them. Because renting them, he showed an example of this golden pocket watch that he wanted for one of his films. And the rental house was asking for like $100 a week to rent it. But he found one that looked very similar on Amazon for $15. And so he bought that one and he got to keep it afterwards. He said you can definitely feel the difference. You know, it feels cheap. It feels like crappy plastic. But with a film, all that matters is how it looks in camera. He recommends doing some tests with any props in camera because you might find that something you thought wouldn't work looks great in camera. Even if it doesn't look great right now, you might be able to see in camera that it actually looks really good, just depending on the lighting and whatever else you have going on. So do some tests with those props to see if it works or not, because you also might think that it looks amazing and then you get it in the camera and it looks like crap. So he recommends always, if you're doing the props yourself, or if you have a small production and you know the props master is someone you know or someone who's relatively inexperienced, make sure that they do some tests with it and they show you those tests so that you can say, yeah, that looks great. It matches what I'm going for. So that you're not going to get on set and realize that it looks a lot worse than you thought originally. But don't think you always need an exact replica or the actual item for your shoot, because a lot of the times you can get away with something a lot cheaper or a lot crappier looking in real life that'll look the same in camera or nearly identical enough to where you're not going to really notice a difference when you're actually shooting it. The thing about props is that they need to look used and worn most of the time. So if the objects that would be used a lot, or if they're brand new, like if they're bought within the film, then they wouldn't need to be looking used. But if there's something that's worn by somebody or used a lot or used especially outside in the elements like armor, weapons, then they should look like they have some of that dirtiness, some of that wear and tear to them. So if you can age props by scratching them, putting different paints and materials like sand, dirt, other things on it, and its crevices so that it looks more used, it's just going to sell that realism a lot more. And you can decide how far you want to go. I think the one bottom right may be a bit too much for what I would say looks realistic. I think either the second one or the first one looks more. It's not too much, but it has some stuff going on where it looks like it's kind of dirty or rusting a little bit. And then you can decide how much, you know, in your thing, how rusted that thing would be. Has it been sitting under a tunnel has it been sitting in a ancient burial ground for thousands of years? Then it's probably going to look a lot different than if it's been used for, you know, the past 2 years by somebody. But just adding the little details that you wouldn't really notice otherwise is something that's going to really create that realism that you wouldn't get otherwise. Because otherwise it's going to look a lot like a play. It's going to look too brand new. We were talking about the same thing with costumes Monday. Costumes, props, all the art department stuff should look a little worn, should look a little lived in, like it's been used before. Otherwise, unless it's brand new in the film, or unless it's like a really well taken care of item, like something for royalty, you know, a ring or a crown, something that they might shine all the time and keep a pristine condition. If it's something else that somebody of a lower class or somebody who's not really going to take care of it all the time is going to use, then it shouldn't be looking brand new. This video I also thought was really interesting was video I. It's come from a channel called Ugly McGregor. And it's how to create authentic looking aged paper in a few minutes. What he does is it makes, I think this is actually from the video, this picture. He makes the paper look a lot more worn. He uses coffee and water, puts it in like a paper towel, and then lets it seep through onto the paper and just kind of scrubs it over it, giving it that aged look and feel. And then he uses what is called a paper distressor on the edges. If you look at it, you can see creating these little tiny little thin tears. It's not really tearing the paper all the way through, but it's just getting the edges a little bit more worn down looking, so they don't look like the bottom side, which is just, it looks like a new piece of paper. On the right, now it looks a little more like it's been used, it's been around, and it's not brand new. And then what he did was he just took it, crumpled it up a bit, kind of folded it together, and gave it so that it kind of twisted in on itself. Because paper, when it gets older, it starts to kind of bend in on itself, and it's not completely flat anymore. It has some waviness to it, I guess. So if you're doing anything with paper, like an ancient scroll or a message or something that's been in a bottle, traveling the ocean for a while, you start making it a little more yellow, then a little more brown, depending on its age. You just keep giving it darker color and a bit more scratches, tears, and bends to get it to look more realistic. If you don't do that, it's not going to look like a real prop. So does anyone have anything to add or questions or comments about props or props masters? Oh, and again, property masters is like the actual title, but props is just the short-term version of it. So if you ever see anything about property in any kind of film document or something, that is going to be talking about props department. Locations and property are not the same thing. Property doesn't mean the property of the location. It's just talking about all the props in the film. Locations is going to be where you go to shoot. All right. The next thing we're talking about is distribution negotiations. So these are just some things you want to look out for in a distribution deal that you might want to feel like you can negotiate for, that you want to watch out for and try to get the better end of the deal. And just some tips on like how to navigate that from different people. So we're negotiating a distribution deal. It's good to have a sales agent or a producer's rep if possible, because they are going to be much more knowledgeable in what makes a good deal and what to fight for. It's also good to have an entertainment lawyer to look over the contracts and be sure that everything is good. So I can't stress that enough. Everybody says the same thing. If you can, try to get a producer's rep, entertainment lawyer, or a sales agent to help you out, help guide you, and help you get a good deal. Entertainment lawyer is mainly for contracts and making sure everything is legit and that it's all good to go. They're going to know what a good deal is and what's not. Producer's rep can help you try to get distribution so they can help represent you and actually making the deal. So they want to get the best deal for themselves as well, because they get a percentage of the profits usually, or they take a fee up front. So whatever the way they do it, they're going to try to get the best deal for you. Sales agents, they take a percentage of the profits, so they also want the best deal possible. They take a commission. Anyway, this stuff comes from filmmakermagazine.com. So if, however, you are going to be negotiating the terms yourself, there's some stuff to look out for. We've talked about much of this before in this semester, but just to like go over some of it to bring it back up, I guess. First, you want to try negotiating down the rights you're giving to any one distributor as much as you can, because some distributors are better at certain things, like they might be better at video on demand platforms and distributing to those, and not very good at theatrical release. So if you're going for both, if you're trying to do theatrical and video on demand with your project, you want to try to distribute the rights to different distributors as spread out as possible, so that they can focus and zone in on what they are best at. And that way you can get your maximum return, the maximum gains from that project. Research them. Do your due diligence on the distributors you are dealing with. Then try to get a good deal, giving away as small of rights as possible, unless you trust them with like a few things. Then give them whatever they're best at. Try to just give them whatever they're best at. If they're good with theatrical and you're going for theatrical, then try to give them just the theatrical rights for your country. That way you can also do international with somebody else or a few other different distributors, sales agents, and things like that. When negotiating a deal, this is any sort of business, but it's always best to pick your battles. You may want to change all the unfavorable terms and make them more favorable toward you, but that's not really realistic. Stick to changing the most important terms to you. So whatever's most important for you, stick to just trying to get a few things more towards your favor, because you're not going to be able to get everything that you want in a deal. You're going to have to compromise on some things. And sometimes it's better to be having like, oh, this one's more favorable for the distributor, but this other thing's more favorable for me. So I'm going to go ahead and let them have this other thing because I don't care about it as much. And so it's like a push and pull, give and take to figure out like what things are most important and what do I need out of this deal compared to what do I want out of this deal. With splitting the rights, you must also factor in that you'll have to go out and get deals from other distributors with those other unsold rights. So if you did only sell the rights to theatrical release in the United States to one distributor, then just keep in mind that you're going to now have to find somebody to do video on demand release. You're going to have to find international distributors. So you will have to end up doing a little bit more work, but you'll end up getting more money in return, most likely. If you are unable to get another deal, or you're not sure if you'll be able to, then you may find that it's a better option to sell more rights to the current distributor for a bit better of a deal. So like they pay a bit more or they take a bit less out of the revenue because they're going to have more rights to different ways to distribute the film, because you're not sure or you know that you're not going to be able to get another distributor to buy the other rights to the film. Also, you want to keep in mind that if the film is successful, you may have an easier time finding other distributors to sell rights that you held on to. So that's another thing to it. Maybe you only gave theatrical rights for the United States to one distributor, and you can't find anyone else to buy the rights to the other parts of this film yet. So you can't find anyone for video on demand. You can't find any international interest. But then once they distribute it out to the United States theatrically, maybe it starts getting more popular. It's a little bit successful, starting to make a little bit of money. Now you have a lot more leverage and you have a lot more interest from different distributors to buy the rest of the rights. So because you held on to those rights and didn't give them to the first person that gave you a deal, you now have a better option to get more of a better deal from other distributors and get more money for yourself. So it's all up to what you think you can do and how much work you're trying to put into it, whether you give a lot of the rights to one distributor or if you try to give it to multiple and split them up as much as you can. Some of the different rights include theatrical distribution rights, pay TV, right? It's like cable, free TV, like broadcast, video on demand, which might be broken up into different ones like TVOD, which is transactional video on demand. Somebody pays a fee to either buy or rent your movie directly. SVOD, subscription video on demand, Netflix, HBO Max. You know, they have all this content that you can watch if you subscribe to that platform. AVOD, advertised-based video on demand. Hulu, the free version, where you have advertisements in the middle, or Tubi and these other platforms that are based on advertising for people. The customers use the product for free or for a smaller fee, but they have ads that they have to watch, and that's how the platform makes their revenue. There's also home video rights. And it's like DVDs, Blu-rays, things like that. Transportation rights. And that could be like if your movie's big enough, they might want to show it to airlines. Airlines might want to show it in their flights, international flights and things like that. So they might want to give people the option to watch that movie. And then there's other less common rights like educational, where a school might be able to show it. And you know, a lot of times that'll be if it's a if it has something to do with some subject relating to school. But other times it might just be that the school wants to buy it to be able to show it as like a college campus weekend event or something. So different ones will have that. That'll be educational rights. Vish said, did you cover songs, music, and soundtrack deals? Is that separate? So songs, music, and soundtrack deals, that's not really distribution as much as it is like financing and budgeting, because you're gonna have to work that out before you even release your film anywhere. You're gonna have to make sure
I
that
think I was gonna say, I think we did cover something like that though last semester, just on the basic topic of like how to find music for your film, how to music deals, that kind of thing.
yeah, because the music is usually separated into different things. There's the people who the production company that produced the music. There's the writer of the music who wrote the song, or sometimes that's split into two people where one person wrote the lyrics, the other person wrote the composition, and then it's whoever played the composition. So there's a bunch of different people involved in music, and it's a big separate thing where it's figuring out how many times you can show it, where you can show it, and things like that. That will definitely affect distribution deals, because if you don't have a good deal with the music that's in your film, like they can't, you only got theatrical rights to the music. They didn't give you anything else. They gave you like a limited rights to their music to use it. Then the distributor is not going to care about getting video on demand unless you change your music and you change all the sound. And then they might not even want your film because they don't think it works as well, because it doesn't have the music that you originally intended it to. But yeah, the music part and the song part will come beforehand, and it should be already worked out and figured out before you it should already be worked out before you get to the distribution deal, because you should have the contracts and everything like that already in it. But you're right, there are also there is something called music rights. So if you are the one making the music for the film, if you've bought all the rights to make music, original music or composition for your film, you can also sell music rights. And depending on the distributor, they may want rights to that or not, and you can decide if you want to negotiate to keep the rights to the soundtrack of your film or not. If it's paid songs, like it's people that have already made them, then it's a bit more dependent on whether you have good agreements with those soundtrack deals and the songs. But if it's original music and you made sure that the composer knew that, you know, you're buying all the rights from them, you have that in their contract, and they don't have any rights to it anymore, then except for credit, then you can hold on to the soundtrack and either try to sweeten the deal of the distribution deal by saying you can also have the soundtrack rights, or you can keep it yourself and then try to give it to somebody else that is really specific with doing music rights. So there is that. But yeah, so that is it is very difficult to navigate music because there's so many different aspects to it. But if it's original music and you did the right contract where you bought all the rights to the music, you were paying the composer to sell you the rights to that composition and the soundtrack, or you're making original songs for it and you're paying the writers and the people who perform it to sell you the rights to use it however you want, then you own all the rights to it and you can decide what you want to do with the music rights in a distribution deal or keeping it to sell later if your film gets popular, something like that. Whatever rights you don't want to grant need to be described with reserved, what's called reserved rights in the contract. Those are the rights that are going to be held back. So if you have reserved rights for theatrical, the theatrical rights are reserved rights. That means that the filmmaker or the producer or whoever's making the contract for the distributor holds on to the rights. they hold on to the theatrical rights. The distributor gets whatever rights are in the contract, but whatever is in the reserved rights is not given to them. The distributor may want to put limitations on the reserved rights. So like if they are handling theatrical distribution, so they are the ones you are selling theatrical rights to them, they may insist you don't distribute to home video or video on demand until a certain amount of time has passed. They want to try to get money from the theaters as much as possible if they get the rights to it. So they want to be like, okay, but for 4 months, 6 months, you can't release this film anywhere else. You still get the rights to video on demand. So you can decide if you want to try to put it on Tubi or Netflix or whatever with someone else. But you can't distribute to those platforms. You can't release it on those platforms until this amount of time later, so that we can try to get money from theaters. And so that's a pretty normal thing. And that is usually like with a lot of productions. Now, more recently, it started being kind of like cross-posted between video on demand and theaters at the same time, even for the big companies. So it really just depends on the contract, but many distributors who are just getting theatrical rights are going to want there to be some kind of time span before you release it everywhere else, because otherwise people have less of an incentive to go to the theater and watch it. And that means they get less money. So they're putting in all this work and they don't get as much revenue. They don't get as much of a percentage of the money. And of course, they want as big of a percentage as they can get. So you also might want to include a clause in the contract that any rights not expressly granted to the distributor belongs to you. So that way, if you forgot any rights, to put it into the reserved rights section, or if you don't have reserved rights in your contract, if you have a clause somewhere that states any rights that I'm not expressly stating in this contract that goes to the distributor, they do not own. I still own those. So that would be, again, theatrical rights. You expressly state in the contract you are selling them the theatrical rights, and in the contract it states how much they're giving you for that and how long it lasts and all these other things. And then you have that clause that says anything that wasn't expressly told that they get still belongs to me. Then that means you still own the rights to video on demand, home video release, free TV, pay TV, and all those other kinds of rights. You may also try to carve out what's called a non-exclusive deal for home video. So that way, if the distributor wants rights to home video, this would allow you to also sell DVDs or Blu-rays directly to people who want to buy them. So independent projects, a lot of the times, some of the ways they make their money, having like a website or a Facebook page or something where they can say, if you'd like to buy my film, if you'd like to support me, you can go on my website, or you can follow this link and buy a DVD or a Blu-ray from me. And then people will do that. And that's one way that they make money. And if the distributor's trying to buy home video release rights, then they're going to want to sell DVDs and Blu-rays, but sometimes they will also let the filmmaker go ahead and try to do it directly from their website, because not everybody's going to do that. So if maybe they have a deal with like Walmart and stuff like that, so they know that they can sell some DVDs if they just get Walmart to agree to it, put that DVD out there in all their stores, then they're going to start raking in some revenue from there. But they also let you have the rights to sell it directly from your website or your Facebook page or wherever you're trying to sell it from, so that you can also sell some directly. If you don't have a deal like that, then all the home video rights would go to them, and you can't sell any DVDs or Blu-rays. So if you're interested in doing that, you might want to do a non-exclusive deal for home video. Any kind of non-exclusive deal means you are not the only one who gets the rights to this. You just get the right to distribute it, but you're not the only one. Exclusive deals mean you're the only one who gets rights to this, and nobody else can do anything in this area. And so typically speaking, a lot of the different rights you give out, like theater rights, no distributor is ever going to take it if you're trying to do non-exclusive. Why would they want to compete with another distributor who's also trying to distribute the film theatrically? Because they're gonna run into each other at some point trying to release to theaters. And so obviously those kinds of deals are going to be exclusive only. And there's only some things like home video that they might be willing to not do exclusive deals with. Video on demand, there's so many platforms out there that they might be willing to do a non-exclusive deal. But it just depends. And they might try to be like exclusive to certain platforms. So if they know they're trying to get it on Hulu, they're trying to get it on Netflix, they're trying to get it on Tubi, then they might be like, we want video on demand exclusive rights to these platforms, but we'll have non-exclusive rights for the rest. So somebody else can go in and distribute to the other platforms, video on demand, because there's so many out there right now. The term is another point you want to negotiate most of the time. So most deals are for about 5 to 10 years, but some are more established distributors. They still try to go for about 20 years because they have more leverage. It's usually better for the filmmaker to do a shorter term so that if it's not working out, if the distributor is not doing what you want, you don't have to be locked in with them for a long period of time. So you want to try to get usually what you want to try to do is get a smaller term if possible, 5 years, 3 years, but not 20 years, not 30 years, because that's basically my whole life, So then if the distributor is not doing what you want, you have a better option of trying to re-release it or make a better deal. If your film is successful, it'll have another deal 5, 10 years down the line that you can make more money from than if you just keep it with the same distributor forever and you can never renegotiate a deal. Any extensions to that term should also be negotiated for mutual benefit. We talked about this. One of the things that a red flag for a distributor to do is to try to have automatic extensions without performance. So it's not performance based. It's not based on any kind of how many sales they do. It's not based on any of that. It's just an automatic extension. So maybe they did a 5-year deal, but they have an automatic extension set in to where that deal just keeps extending itself. Well, then you're not really signing a 5-year contract. You're signing much longer than that because they have automatic extensions. So anything with the extensions in it, that's something you want to negotiate for most of the time to get it to be mutually beneficial. Because you might want automatic extensions in there. It's a good thing if they are doing really good with your project. They're distributing it well, if you're making a continued income and they're doing their best to market it and whatever else, then automatic extensions with them are normally beneficial for both parties because you don't have to renegotiate. You don't have to do all the time to get a new entertainment lawyer to look over the contracts and figure all that out. You just keep the same contract and keep it going. So sometimes it's actually beneficial to do that instead. It really just depends on how good the distributor's doing and how often they are showing you the reports and paying you out and whatever else from your project. You may also want to try to negotiate a performance requirement, which would state a distributor has to reach a certain level of sales within a certain time frame, or it gives you the option to terminate the contract if the distributor fails to get those numbers by the specified time. Of course, a lot of this is going to be dependent on how large your film is, how much of a budget it has, how do you have named actors, how sellable is this thing? But if you have more leverage, you can definitely negotiate for something like that. So then you can tell the distributor, you should have done your research beforehand to make sure you know how much this film is worth. And then once you've done that, you go into these deals and you talk about, well, we know that this film's supposed to be worth $1 million. All the other films like it at the budget level we have with the list of actors we have sell for around this. So, that's the general area we're trying to get is $1 million. And then you can have a realistic expectation of how long into the distribution plan are you going to be before you get that $1 million. And if they don't ever get that $1 million by a year, 3 years, 5 years in, then you can have the option of terminating the contract to go with someone else. And that would be the performance requirement. You have to meet this amount of sales at this point in time. If you don't, then we're taking the film back and selling it to somebody else. But again, you want to be realistic with that. A distributor may want to recoup their expenses before you're able to terminate the contract. That could be another thing. They're putting money into it. A distributor is usually going to put money into it to do a trailer, artwork, or to market it in some way. And so they will most likely want to recoup those expenses before you're allowed to terminate the contract, because then it's just a complete loss for them. So if they're not doing well with the film, and they're not making as much money as you both thought they would, they still want to try to get their expenses back before you cancel that contract and go with someone else. Also, normally you really don't want to have to actually get the rights back, because there's often a time sensitivity to getting deals upon the completion of the project. A lot of projects, you complete it and it has a short window, maybe a few months of being, how do I say this, like being like attractive to distributors. They want new things. They want things that just came out. Distributors don't often want, unless it's successful, they don't really want things that are old, that have already been out in the market, because they've seen that they're not really selling well anyway. So why do I want this thing? It's just an extra thing for me to handle. And so they usually want the new things that have a optimistic outlook. And also, by the time a year or two passes, most people who were going to see the film probably have, unless it was just completely mismarketed. But typically speaking, when a film's been out for that long, everyone who was going to watch it did. And so it has less of a value. And so the main value comes from that first little time after you're done making the film, or after you're done doing a festival run. After that, the value of that film drops. Because unless it's successful, unless it's getting a bunch of views and it's a huge hit that nobody saw coming, then, obviously it's going to be worth a lot more. But what that will do, having a clause like that says you have a performance to hit, and if you don't, we take the film back, it could help motivate the distributor so that they don't lose their rights, and it may get them to work harder at it, to try to meet those goals as best as they can. So, sometimes it's a good thing to have in there without you actually feeling like you're really going to take advantage of it. Now, if a distributor's doing horrible with it and they're just completely mismarketing it and they're doing awful, then you probably want to buy it back and do your best to sell it to someone else. But if it's just like you're not meeting the goals, but you're getting kind of close, then it's just more of a motivator for them to try to do the best they can with it, because they don't want to lose the rights to it. They want to try to make money off of it. And the way they do that is by continuing to distribute it. If you truly believe in your film and its revenue capabilities, you can negotiate for an advance, or something also known as a minimum guarantee. That's what a distributor puts down up front to buy the rights to distribute the film. They will then subtract this and their commission fee from the revenues until they make their money back. And then any excess amount of money or revenue that comes in after that, they'll take their commission fee and the rest will go to you. So they actually, in the website for Filmmakers Magazine, talking about distributors, they actually have they broke it down to show you what it means. Like, the distributor agrees to pay a minimum guarantee of $100. Obviously that's really small, but we're just working with small numbers, so it's easier to understand. The distributor's distribution fee is 20%, And their initial expenses for marketing, making a trailer, and whatever else is $15. So in the first period, your work earns reported revenues of $50. So a period is whatever amount of time they say. Maybe it's a month, maybe it's a week. Depends on whatever they count as what the period is, but different periods of revenue streams. So the revenue comes in waves in a way. So there's $50 there, and then the distributor takes out their 20%, that's $10. And then their expenses, because they paid $15 to market it, they're going to take that back. And the advance balance, because they gave you an advance, a minimum guarantee of $100, that is basically taken away from the receipts, the revenue. Now you have a total of $125, where the balance is negative $75. So you still owe them $75 for the minimum guarantee they gave you. And so in the next round of funding, the next round of revenue, hopefully you recoup that $75 so that you can start earning additional income on top. So you don't really receive a payment, even though your work earned $50, because it's all going back to them for their cut, their percentage, their expenses, and the minimum guarantee that they've already paid you so far. Now, in the second round of the accounting period, your work earns revenues of $150, and the expenses are $5. So they marketed it a bit more, saying, here's what people are saying about the film and whatever else, and they spent a little bit of money to market it out further. So then you get revenue of $150. The distributor still takes their 20%, and then they take back those expenses, the $5 they spent. The advance that they had given you had $75 that they didn't recoup yet, and so they're taking that out of it. And so the total that's taken out of that 150 is 105. And now you have positive $45, and that $45 goes to you. So now in the next round of accounting, they've made back their minimum guarantee, and the only thing that they're going to take out is their percentage fee, which is 20%. So 20% of whatever comes in, and then any additional expenses they've done for marketing it further. And everything else will go back to you at that point for the third round. And that's the way it works. So that's why some filmmakers will never see money after they get a minimum guarantee, because the minimum guarantee has to be paid back first. It's basically just like, we're going to pay you this, and you're going to make this amount of money no matter what happens, no matter how much money this film actually makes. We're giving you this amount because we believe this film will take off. If it doesn't, you get to keep that money. No matter what, you get to keep the minimum guarantee. And then they start taking their distribution fee of 20% out of each round of funding or round of revenue. And they take out their expenses, whatever they put in to market the film or help distribute it. They take those expenses back as well. Minimum guarantees are good because you get funds regardless if the film flops or not. But higher advances, so a higher minimum guarantee, usually comes with a higher distribution fee. So instead of that being 20%, if they give you a minimum guarantee of $150 instead of $100, that they might want a distribution fee of 30%. So a higher percentage. And you get more money up front, but if your film is really successful, you're going to end up losing money on the back end because they're going to take out a bigger percentage each time. So you have to figure out like what you think. Obviously you don't really know. Nobody knows how good this film is going to do or how bad. You have to figure out what's worth it to you. Is it worth having a higher upfront money that you're going to, no matter what happens, you made that money? Or is it going to be better to have a smaller percentage, a smaller amount of money up front so that you can make more money as the revenue comes in later? Sometimes the largest advances are good, sometimes they're not. It just depends on how well the film does and how the distributor handles payments. So the distributor may try everything they can. If it's not a really good distributor, they may not accurately account for all of the revenue. And that could be on purpose or it could be on accident. They could just not be very good with it. They're not really good at keeping track of everything. So that is why it's always important to do due diligence, make sure that this distributor is paying out on time and that they're paying out what they should be. And you do that by looking at who they've represented before, who they distributed to before, and talking to those filmmakers and just asking them what they think. Was the business good? Did they pay out on time? Did they give you the right amount of money? All of those things you want to figure out beforehand so that you can trust your distributor once you agree to a deal with them. So typically, when we're talking about fees for distributors, most of the time, an average is going to be about, if a distributor is handling multiple markets and mediums, so they're taking over video on demand and theatrical and home video and all of these things, are taking on multiple markets, multiple areas, territories. They usually take about 20 to 50%. The more stuff they take on, they usually have a higher distribution fee. If they're doing international, especially, the fees are pretty high, 45 to 50% for international distributors. Home video, if they get home video rights and they're a distributor for that, they'll give out either royalties to the filmmaker, like 15 to 30%. So anytime a DVD or a Blu-ray sells, the filmmaker gets 15% of that, or up to 30% typically. So if a DVD is $10, then you'll make $3 off of that if you have a 30% royalty. 20% is pretty common, they say. So a royalty fee for any kind of sale is about 20%, is pretty average for home video stuff, because the distributor is the one who's creating all the DVDs and getting the deals with Walmart and the stores and Amazon and whoever else to market it the best way they can and to have it distributed through those stores. They're the ones who are shipping it out to those people. So they're taking on a bunch of costs to do home video release stuff. And that's why they might just give the filmmaker, even though it sounds bad, that's why the filmmaker gets about 15 to 30%. Because if the filmmaker tried to take on home video by themselves, they're going to spend quite a bit of money to be able to get it ready, and they're not going to have the same connections to get it in as many stores as a well-established home video distributor might. And that's why the 15 to 30% or the 20% average is pretty normal. Or sometimes with home video, they pay flat fees as well. So instead of a percentage of the DVDs that are sold or the Blu-rays that are sold, they just pay you out a flat fee to acquire the rights to do it themselves, and they get to keep all the money that comes in from that. So it's kind of like a minimum guarantee, but it's for home video. With cable and broadcast rights, the distributor fee is usually around 20 to 40%. With theatrical release, it could be anywhere from 15 to 40% for their fees. The factors that go into these fees may include the market and how hard or easy it's deemed that your film is going to be able to sell in those markets, the amount of the minimum guarantee they give you or the advance. So however much money they pay you up front, that's also going to depend on how much of the fee is, of course. If there's any competition or bidding wars for your work, so that's like the best thing for a filmmaker, is if 2 or more distributors want it, then they will offer a deal, and then you can bring that deal to the other person and say, well, company ABC is offering me this. What are you going to give me? And then they give you a better deal. And then you go to the other company, go back to ABC, and you go, well, EFG gave me this. So now are you going to up yours, or are you going to cancel out? And then the more distributors you have bidding for it, the better your chance of getting a really good deal and a really good terms favored toward you, as well as more money, more of a minimum guarantee, less of a percentage of a fee for the distributor, all those things. So the best thing you can get is two or more companies bidding for it at the same time, because that's, you can pit them against each other in a way and just keep bringing it to each other and going, hey, now they're offering this. It's kind of like when you're trying to get a job and you have, or you already have a job and you're offered another job somewhere else. You can then bring it to your boss and go, hey, I'm offered $30 at this other place. Are you going to give me 30 or 31? No? All right, I'm going to the other place. Bye. And so it just helps give you more leverage when there's more people bidding for your thing or wanting it. And then also what's going to affect the percentages and stuff is the work itself. You know, how high value is it? How long is it? And if it has any awards or named actors and things like that, that's going to up the chances of it being worth more. Also expenses and how much the distributor expects to take on to distribute or market the film. So if they expect that they're going to have to be the ones to make the trailer and the artwork and do all the advertising and marketing themselves, they'll want a higher percentage because they're taking on more expenses up front. So even though they're going to recoup those expenses, they aren't absolutely sure they're going to get their money back. And that is why when they take on more work, they charge extra for the fees, the expenses, but they also are going to usually have a higher distribution fee, a higher percentage taken out from all the funding that comes in because they're taking on more risk. And that is why whenever you are talking about fees, like expenses, marketing, advertising, and all of that, you always want to consider giving a cap to the dollar amount they can accrue, because they'll take this money out of revenues until they recoup those expenses. So like we showed, if their expenses are $15, you don't get any money back until they take out their 20% fee and then their expenses on top of that. And so if they just have unlimited expenses that they don't have a cap, they might try to spend as much as they can on the expenses so that they can just make back all of the money for the film from that point on. And that's usually why you want to try to give them a cap of like, you can't go over this amount of money when you're trying to advertise or market this film, because you want to make sure you're getting something back later, usually. I mean, all the time. And then there's also what's called an assumption agreement, and that transfers any legal obligations to pay any licensing fees like music. So if you are licensing music, sometimes they will say, every time you distribute it to a new platform, or you know, if you are doing transactional on-demand video and we get a percentage of the sales. You know, so if it's $5, $4 per movie rental, and you know, this many people rented it, we take blank a percentage out of that because you're using our music. So that's music licensing sometimes, and that they take out a percentage of the profit or the revenue, depending on what the deal is, how big that music thing was, and what contract you have with that. And then there's also sometimes you might have a special contract that a crew or a cast member might have. Typically, they'll be above the line, one of the creative members of the thing, or somebody with a lot of leverage that is well known. And in their contract, they might have a royalty fee. The more the product is shown, the more they get royalty fees from it. So when it's sold, like the people in Friends, those actors, they have royalties from that show. So every time it's shown on TV, or every time it's sold to a new distributing platform like Netflix, or I think HBO Max actually owns it. So I don't know if they get any extra from it going back to them. But whenever it's sold to a new thing, they get some amount of money from it because they still have some kind of royalty agreement in their contracts. So certain actors that are really well known, or certain crew members might have that. And if you don't put it in your contract with your distributor, if there's no assumption agreement, which means they assume that you probably have stuff like that and they're taking on those obligations so that they're the ones paying out those fees, If that's not in the contract and you do have those deals with either music, with the music licensing or with certain crew or cast, then you'll have to pay it out of pocket whether you have made money yet or not. So that's something to look out for. And try to pass it off to your distributor if you can, so that any money that comes in, they have the obligation to then pay out to the actors, the crew, the music people to meet those contract obligations you signed with all of them. And as much as you can, try not to have those things in any of your previous contracts, because it does make your distribution agreement less attractive, because now there's more money that has to be given out to other people because you've made agreements in pre-production stuff. Now, if you have a huge actor that's coming on a small budget film, it's probably worth it to give them some percentage agreement to get them to stay on. But other than that, like, you just don't want to hand those out all over the place to everyone if you can help it, because it's just going to make it harder to sell later. But if you do end up having those, just try to get an assumption agreement with the distributor so that they take on all those rights, all those obligations to pay those people when there's funding coming in. You also want to negotiate, just like you want to negotiate if they don't perform well, the distributor's not selling it, it's not getting sold anywhere, or it's just not making enough money because they're not doing it right. You also want to negotiate that you can terminate the contract if the distributor fails to make payments to you over a certain period of time. Some distributors will be very wishy-washy with when they pay. Other ones will be paying exactly on time, maybe every 3 months or whenever the agreed upon time is. And they'll stick to a certain schedule of when the payments go out to you. Other ones, they might pay you right now, they might pay you 3 months from now, they might pay you every year. Like, they don't really say when they'll do it. And it's a bit harder to get the money from them, which is another thing filmmakers complain about. And again, that goes back to making sure that you talk to people who have worked with them before to make sure they pay on time and that they have a good schedule of payments so that you're continuously getting your money instead of you having to hassle them to get it, because that's always annoying and extra work for you later on. But just in case, you want to say in the contract, if you don't pay me for 6 months and I'm waiting and you still haven't paid me at all, and I'm owed money for our agreement, then I get to cancel this contract with you and sell it to someone else because you're not doing what you're obligated to. You're not paying me my rightful amount that we agreed upon. And so something like that can be in your contract. You also want a clause that states, in the event, we already talked about this, but in the event of bankruptcy, all of your assets and work immediately return to you and can't be used on the distributor's balance sheet as an asset. Otherwise, if you don't have anything in your contract like that, if they go bankrupt, they may put your film as an asset and it'll be sold to somebody else to help meet their bankruptcy debt obligations. And so you always want to try to get a clause in there that states, in the event of that happening, however unlikely it may be, I get all of my stuff back. And anything you did for marketing, I get all that. Anything involved with this film, I get all my stuff back and I get to use it to sell to somebody else. And it's not yours to go into bankruptcy with. So definitely look out for that and definitely put a clause like that in somewhere in the contract. They shouldn't have any worry about it if they're not worried about going bankrupt, because other than that, it's theirs. It's their asset for however long you've agreed to. And hopefully the company's not assuming they're going to go bankrupt soon. And so they should be fine putting that into the agreement because it doesn't really affect them. If they're going bankrupt, there's not really anything they're going to be able to do anyway. They're not going to be able to sell your film again and come out of bankruptcy, most likely. They're going to just go under. And so that will just protect you and your film from getting taken down with them if they end up having that unlikely scenario happen. You also may want to negotiate that any sub-distribution deals, which is where the distributor hires other companies for more specific work, has to be approved by you. So that way you see the rights given, the time period of that contract, and the additional fee that will come out of the revenue. So you can see, like, because now it's going to be stacked. It's going to be one company gets theirs if they're distributing internationally. If you distributed to a company, you sold the rights to one company and they sub-distributed it to an international company to distribute it overseas. Well, that international company is going to take their part of the fees. Then they're going to give the money to the distributor that you had the agreement with. And then that distributor is going to take the money out of their fees. And then whatever's left goes to you. So it's kind of like the fees are stacked like that. Oftentimes it might be good. It might be beneficial for you because they might have a better relationship with those other companies. They might know who to go for and who specifically will do the best with these rights. And so they might get the right company and have a better relationship to where they can make a good deal, better than you'd be able to make on your own. But you still want to have something in there that says any deals that you're doing with other companies, you just give me the final contract before it's fully signed, and I get to decide if I want to approve it or not. You may also want to see how well those relationships are, because you may be able to get the deal with the third company yourself, saving you money. So vice versa, if they don't really have a good relationship with that company, then you might just be, it might be just as hard or just as easy for you to get a deal with them as it is with the distributor that you have. And that way you're saving a little bit more money because they won't be taking out a percentage from the other distributor's work. But if they do have a good relationship with them, they'll probably get a good deal, and it'll probably be beneficial for you. You still want to kind of have that final say, so you can look over it to make sure you are in agreement with how much money and how long that contract is with that other company. Because another thing that happens, like we talked about with the red flags thing, is you sign an agreement for 5 years with distributor ABC, and you sign it for video on demand, home release, theatrical, whatever, everything nationally, whatever country you're in. And then they sub-distribute to another company to do international sales for 20 years. Well, it starts to get really convoluted and confusing of what's going to happen, because the distributor you have an agreement with only has that contract and those rights for 5 years, but now they've just sold the rights to another company for 20 years. And so after your agreement's up, do they still get money from that, from the international thing, and then it's passed to you, or do they get cut out of the deal entirely? Those things are all like really why it's important to have an entertainment lawyer there to help figure out what's going to happen, because you don't want that to happen. You don't want them to sign a deal with somebody else that's longer than the deal that you have made with them. And so then again, that goes back to, you look at the final deals for sub-distribution, make sure that you agree with them that the term isn't longer than the term you have with the current company, and that everything is going to be okay in your book, and that you're okay with whatever's going to happen. Another thing that you want to do is you also want to have a clause that allows you to check into the distributor's ledger and financing at any point, which would allow you to see if the distributor is paying the fair amount. And if you ever feel like they are not paying their fair share, you're able to go look at their books and see if they are giving you your fair share or not. We already talked about that. Much larger distributors most likely are not going to want you to look at their books, because they have a lot of other stuff going on and they don't want you to see their finances. But for the most part, independent distributors and independent filmmakers, you're not going to get you're usually not going to get deals from the huge distributors that distribute all the biggest movies. You're usually going to get it with more independent distributors and smaller companies. And so they should be fine with you looking through their books because they should have nothing to hide, and they're not really like creating as many things as the big companies are. Another thing you want to look out for is cross collateralization. Geez. It's another thing you want to negotiate to not have if you can. A distributor may package your film with others. So like if they have multiple films they're trying to sell at once, they may package your film with all those others and include them in a bundle to try to sell to different platforms. However, this may mean that other films' expenses are counted against your film's revenue and vice versa. So your expenses might be counted against other films' revenue because all the revenue is coming from a bundle. They're just grouping all the expenses and grouping all the revenue into one. So you typically want to try to have a clause that states your work's revenue will not be attributed to other films' costs and obligations. That way, if they do try to make it into a bundle of like, we're selling 20 films to this company, your expenses for your film are the only thing that's going to be counted against your revenue for yours. So when they split up the revenue between the 20 films, you get to pay off your expenses and then you get the rest of the revenue. Otherwise, they just count it against the bundle's expenses, which could be a lot more. They might have put a lot more money into some other film than yours, and now you don't get to see your money because they are doing cross collateralization. So just look out for that. Try to negotiate them to not have it or yours to be kind of exclusive to your stuff. Your film's revenue goes solely to your film's expenses, and it's not combined with any other films, whether they put it in a bundle to sell to distributors or not. Another way cross collateralization happens is if the distributor takes revenue from one market to pay back expenses for another. So if you're giving a distributor rights to multiple markets, like if you give them video on demand rights and you give them theatrical rights, a way that this could be not in your favor is this: if they take video on demand sales and count it against theatrical expenses, because they might have paid a lot more money to try to market it theatrically, with different ads on YouTube and ads in theaters themselves, trailers, and showing those trailers all over the place and paying for that. They might have put them a lot more money into the theatrical market than they have in video on demand. And so if video on demand is making, $10,000 that month, but the theatrical expenses they paid is $50,000, with cross collateralization, they might try to take the money from video on demand and apply it to the theatrical's expenses. And you typically want to avoid that. You typically want to have, if you have bargaining power, you want all the markets to be isolated for their own expenses and revenue. So if you do sell multiple rights to the same distributor, if you are able to, if you have some leverage, you want to try to say, whatever cost you put into the theater side of things, theatrical release, the revenue coming in from ticket sales, from theatrical ticket sales, is the only thing that's applied against those expenses. So if you end up not making the money back from the expenses you put into the theater, like maybe it just bombs at the theater and the theater doesn't make anything because nobody wants to go to the movie theater. Well, you would still be making money because they're not offsetting those expenses with the sales coming in from video on demand. They would just take out whatever their distribution percentages, their expenses that they put into video on demand, and then giving you the rest of the money coming from video on demand. If you didn't have something like that, then they're just going to count all their expenses together and all the revenue together. And then they're going to just keep taking out of those expenses until they're fully paid off. So it's definitely in the filmmaker's favor if you can isolate those markets, and because they don't make their expenses back until you get money coming in anyway. It's not like they shouldn't be billing you for those expenses unless you have a really bad contract. And most of the time, that's not the case. They usually make money off the back end of the revenue coming in. So if you can isolate those markets, you'll have less money being taken out for expenses because their expenses will be spread out into different markets. They'll be advertising for the theater differently than they're advertising for video on demand or home release. Another thing, these are often negotiable, but remember that the more work and costs the distributor takes on, the more risk they take on, which means higher fees. So there's another thing, if you fail to deliver all of the deliverables that are agreed upon, the distributor may have the right to do it themselves and charge the expense back to you. And they may not pay the advance to you, as those are given out upon full delivery of the film, including all agreed upon distributables. Distributables might be things like a trailer, artwork, and whatever else, whatever kind of marketing materials they feel like they need. Error and omission insurance to make sure if you missed anything during your contracts with the actors and the music and whatever else, there's insurance against it. So if you did miss something and somebody's going to file a lawsuit a year later because they don't want to be seen in the film and you forgot to do a contract or your contract's not legally correct, that errors and omission insurance is going to help them to be able to not have to like pay out of pocket for your mistake. And so those things are all called deliverables. There's plenty of them. And you want to make sure that whatever deliverables you agreed to give the distributor, you are able to do on time, because otherwise if they say you need to do the trailer and then you don't, in the contract, they may have the right to go ahead and do the trailer themselves, but then they're going to add that to the expenses, or they may have it in the trailer. I mean, they might have it in the contract that they can bill to you because you agreed to deliver it to them, but you didn't. And so they were ready to have it at a certain date, but you didn't give it to them. So they had to go and do it themselves. And then they might be like, well, here you go. It cost us $10,000 to make this. So whatever you agree upon, just make sure that you are able to deliver what you say you can in whatever time frame they give you. If it's not realistic enough, that's when you can start negotiating with it. Like, I don't think I'm gonna be able to do this, that, and that by that time. Can we extend it, or can we make a different agreement to have you do it so that it's in the agreement that you're gonna do it already? And then you start working that stuff out. You start negotiating what deliverables are needed and what the distributor will do. This stuff comes from IndieWire.com. They say, don't go it alone. Get someone who knows what they're doing and have done it before. This could be a producer's rep or even a fellow filmmaker or producer that secured deals for past projects. They say don't ever negotiate a deal by email. Either use the phone, Skype, Zoom, or even better in person if you can, because that's going to give you valuable information on the tone, any pauses they take, body language, and things like that. So you can react to those things and try to negotiate if they're making any kind of face or if they're doing any pauses. It gives you a better chance of like wedging your way through it and negotiating a deal. Email, it's easy for people to read it and then think about it for a long time to come up with something. And so it's usually and there's no body language or tone involved. So you're not really sure how the person's saying it. And it's a lot harder to communicate through text and email than it is to actually talk to somebody or see them especially. So if you can't actually go in person, the next best thing is either Zoom or Skype or something like that, where you're seeing them and you're hearing them. If you can't do that, on the phone is the next best thing because you're hearing their tone and you're hearing how they say things and when they're pausing. And yeah, just leave email and text for like the last resort, if nothing else. But they just say don't ever try to negotiate through email. If you can, always use one of the other ways to communicate to do it. This comes from marketit.com. Don't brag about how little you spent to make the film, because doing so may limit the offered amounts you receive. They might be like, oh, well, if you only made it for $20,000, then why are we offering you $50,000? It's way more than you even spent. So they say, like, obviously, if they're doing a deal with you, they're going to want your accounting information and stuff to see what your budget was, and they will eventually find out for the most part. But don't be all like, yeah, we made this film for this little, because like that just lessens. If it looks better than what you paid for it, don't brag about how little you paid for it when you're trying to get a deal for money, because people are going to just value it less at that point. So that's another little tip. This next thing comes from cdas.com. With minimum guarantees, look at the proposed timeline. Some distributors pay out in full upon delivery. So that would be once you get the deliverables that you said you would get to them and you give them the film and it's all ready to go, then they pay you out in full, the minimum guarantee they agreed to. Other distributors pay out over time after full delivery. So you might give them all the deliverables and they had it in the contract that said, maybe the minimum guarantee, let's go back to the $100. $100, we'll give you $100 right up front for you to let us distribute your film. But in the contract, they put that they are going to pay out that $100 over 2 years. So yeah, no matter what, you're making $100, but it's not really right up front. It's kind of like they're paying it out over time. It's better for them, worse for you. So you always want to check out the proposed timeline, because you might be like, that's fine, I don't care. If they're giving you a really good minimum guarantee, your film cost $100,000 and they're giving you $150,000, and you might be like, sweet, yeah, you can pay me out over 2 years because I'll make all my money back and then some, no matter what. And then any additional income I make after that, I get to keep too. But other than that, if they're trying to give you $20,000 and you paid $100,000, that's probably one of those things where you're like, I want that up front because I need to pay back people and investors and things like that. So you really want to keep an eye out for that proposed timeline. How are they paying it all out right away, or are they going to pay it out over time? This next stuff comes from tileissuer.medium.com. Look out for distributor splits in the contract. This is after a distributor takes a fee and recoups their expenses. They try to take a split of the producer's revenue. You should always negotiate to have those removed entirely. I would say that's more on a red flag. It's a little sketchy. Basically, they are getting their percentage fee. They take that out no matter what. And then off the top of that, they're going to take out their expenses. After that, if they gave you a minimum guarantee, they're going to take out the money from that. But then if they have a distributor split somewhere in the agreement, that means they're also trying to take out another split of the profits from your money. So it's really, I would say that's really scummy. Like they're already taking out their percentage on the front, 20%. Right when they get the money, they take that 20%. And then they count all the rest of it to the expenses and the minimum guarantee until those things are paid off. But if they have a split, then they're also going to say, well, then after we take out our 20%, after we pay back our expenses, and after we pay back our minimum guarantee, then we split the rest of the money 70-30, 70 going to you. It's like, well, why are you getting another 30% after all the rest is said and done. You're already getting 20% off the top. So yeah, anything like that, that would be like a thing that's probably hidden in the contract. And you definitely don't want that. So always look out for it. They just recommend negotiate to take out any distributor splits immediately. A split doesn't mean the 20% fee. That's a distribution fee. Those are in every agreement you're going to have with a distributor. Unless you get a really great deal, those are always going to be there. But a distributor split would be after those fees, after all that other stuff. Now we're taking and splitting the money again and giving you whatever. We have a 50-50 split, then we're going to give you 50% after the 20% the expense is, the minimum guarantee. Whatever's left, we're also going to split 50-50. And that's just awful. So look out for that. But does anyone have anything to add, to ask, or comment about negotiating any distribution stuff? Oh, Vish asked, any info did you come across on limited releases, pros and cons? Limited releases as in like you can't release to certain markets, or you can only release a certain amount of time, or what do you mean by limited releases?
Sometimes they have like they do not really the whole bunch of theaters. They'll probably do like 25% of the theaters. I've heard of that limited releases that they do, but I'm not sure.
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. They
Right?
do that it depends on the deal. Again, I would say that depends on the deal. So a limited release would be like a company doesn't have full faith in your project. They're not sure if anyone's going to go to the theaters to see it. And so they're limiting their release to 50 theaters at first. They're doing a really small amount of theaters. And if those work out, if they see there's some interest, then they're going to spread out to more theaters and more release windows, because they also have an agreement with the theaters of how often this film is released. And so a theater will try to get their best deal, and a distributor is trying to get their best deal on that as well, so that both parties can like it. But when a distributor doesn't have full faith in a project, they'll do a limited release where they do a few weeks or maybe one weekend where they just see how is this gonna do in the market, and is it worth it to pay more money to market it out further?
Or they will only release it in a handful of theaters as well, like smaller theaters, that kind of thing.
Yeah, to see if there's any interest there. So that really depends on the agreement between the distributor and the filmmaker, and if you think that it is worth it, because they will often not take as big of a percentage out of that deal, but they can also just do only the limited release and then be like, nah, we don't want it. And now it's going to be harder for you to sell to somebody else because it's already had, that time window of when it's new, when it's been seen already by certain people. That limited release window is going to have a lot of that market taken away in the distributor's eyes. So the next distributor you try to go to might be less willing to, because they're like, well, your limited release didn't work out, so why would I want this? Or I'll give you it, but I'm going to take out a bigger percentage. So
I don't know how much this happens in the indie scene or in the shorter film scene, but I do know that big companies sometimes will do that with properties that they don't think will do as well, but also because they want a bigger release for another property that they also own that they believe will be more popular. So they will put more focus on that one and limit the other one a little less because they believe in that project more. They think it'll make more money. I don't know how much it does in the indie scene, but I know that happens a lot in the bigger.
Yeah, sometimes
studios.
Sometimes I've seen. I don't know if that is part of the contract or they can go after the contract. They would say, okay, we want to do only limited release, or they would go like directly to cable or VOD kind of thing. And that seems like I've seen a few cases where that was a topic of contention between the distributor and the filmmaker. They didn't really see eye to eye on which direction it was going.
I will say, oh, sorry, Vish, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, that was pretty much what I wanted to say.
I was just gonna say that I will say that sometimes it's not always the distributor's fault. Like I shared a video with Coda this week that was very frustrating and honestly kind of disgusting about how Disney will bully movie theaters into having more spots for their films, and they will have to end up cutting or not having enough time slots for other films, for shorter films, because the bigger companies own, they basically can give them more money, and they're like, oh, well, either you give us the majority of these slots, or we're not going to work with you, or we're not going to show our films as much in your theaters. So there's also that aspect to consider. I don't know how big of a role that plays in the smaller scene, but I do know that bigger production companies do bully movie theaters into not having as many slots for the other films. I think Tarantino was talking about this. So that could be another issue as well. The distributor might be trying to give you more slots, but they're like, these are the only ones we can get because we're choosing to release the film, or we're only able to release the film at a time where this other big movie is also releasing, and most movie theaters are more focused on that, or only have slots for that. So timing of your movie is also important and kind of difficult, I would imagine, like negotiating when a movie would be released.
Yeah, like summertime is like a peak time. Yeah, summertime is a peak time for all these big budget movies to show up, and it's very
it was infuriating. It was so infuriating hearing that. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, and so like, because obviously a theater, they only have limited space, they only have a limited amount of screens, and they only have a movie is anywhere from an hour and a half to 2.5 to 3 hours long. They only have a limited amount of time slots they can put that movie in. So it starts at this time, and this screen, screen 12 starts at 12 p.m. and goes to 2:30 p.m. And screen 13 starts at 12:15 p.m. and goes to, it just depends on how popular they think that film is going to be. But like Priscilla was saying, I believe they were talking about Multiverse of Madness, Doctor Strange 2, and how Disney basically was like, if you want our film at all, if you want to show this, and the theater, obviously they want to, because those big films, the big experiences with all the visual effects and everything are what people mainly go to see in theaters. And so they want that because they, as a theater chain, they want to make money. And because theaters are also very chained, they're not like independently owned. It's like AMC theaters, so all of AMC theaters, Disney makes an agreement with AMC and says, or Regal theaters, or, whatever other company that does.
There are some independently owned, but it's a lot harder to be an independently owned theater nowadays because of the companies and agreements, and they buy out a lot of these theaters as well.
And so Disney was saying, if you want to show Multiverse of Madness, then you're going to give us all of your screens. You're going to give us this many screens and this many showings. And they showed, like in New York, one of the ones had like 70 different time slots for that one movie. And so that means that other movies, more independent films, or even the highly budget films like AAA Hollywood movies, like even the other ones that aren't Disney, they can't show at those same times because there's not enough screens available. There's not enough time slots. So they don't get shown as much. And then it looks to distributors and things like that, like that film didn't do as well, but that's because they didn't have as many times. So people who get off work, they might not be able to see it because they got off at 5, but the only showing that movie had was at 5:30. And so they didn't want to try to rush there to see it. So they just didn't go. Whereas Multiverse of Madness, they might have had 5, 5:15, 5:30, 6. So anytime in between when they get off work and an hour and a half to 3 hours later, they can go see that movie. they're more likely, if they're going to go see a movie that night, to see Multiverse of Madness because of that, because there's more times they can go. So that definitely plays a part into the theater aspect of release.
Yeah.
And
So
as
what's like
far-
a average time is like when you make the movies make most of the revenues is about 3 weeks. Is that pretty
I
much
think
it, right?
yeah, I
they
think like
also
that's why
mentioned.
opening weekend is seen as such a big deal, is because that'll really set off the rest. And like you said, like it's like 2 to 3 weeks is where they make their most money, and then it's just diminishing returns. Like they still make money, but it's a lot less. And it's because the people who are going to go see it most likely have seen it by then. And then it's
Yet
just,
they still made an agreement with one of the movie theaters, well, Bully more than anything, that the Star Wars movie, they made it go all holiday season so that they could make as much money as possible from it. For anyone curious, I think the movie's called Why Disney is Ruining Movie Theaters. It's really good.
Mhm.
It infuriated me. And it just made me think about the independent production companies and distributors that are trying to get their work out there and are just being completely pummeled by these companies that are bullying movie theaters. It's honestly pretty disgusting, but from the distribution side, it must be really difficult and frustrating for them as well, because they want to give the best product to their, they want to, have a good agreement, but this is something that's out of their control a lot of the time.
all right. And then I'm going to go ahead and play devil's advocate and say, Disney is, they have a lot of leverage, of course, because their film is going to be huge and everyone knows it. They have a huge crap ton of leverage, and they use that to get the best deal they can to get the most money for their film, and for their film to be seen as the big blockbuster of the summer, and the
Okay, honey,
biggest
but when
movie
you're
of wait,
taking-
honey, the biggest movie of
Okay.
the year, that kind of stuff. So it's hard, because if you were overseeing that business aspect of Disney, you do want to try to get as much money as you can for it. And so unfortunately, they are also trying to get the best deal they can for themselves. And one way of doing that is by holding all the cards and having all the leverage. And unfortunately, that's really bad for independent studios and even bigger studios that don't have as much leverage as Disney, because
I
they've
understand from a business standpoint, you're only doing your job, but I still think that it's a lot of overkill. You know that movie's going to do well. You don't necessarily need to take up from every other movie out there. I know from the business standpoint, it's not the distributor's fault necessarily. I just think it's kind of gross, especially if you are working in an industry, and if you truly claim to love movies and want to create good things, which we know the CEO of Disney doesn't care about. He said it many times. It's all about the money. But yeah, it's just frustrating and kind of disgusting that, it's a lot more corporate, and unfortunately it's the little guy that pays every time.
Again, devil's advocate, if you could have your film and you made it for $100,000 and you have more leverage because you have a big named actor in it. And so maybe you can, not very big, but maybe you have a bigger named actor than another independent film. And so you have the leverage to have 2 showings instead of 1, where the other one might get kicked out of a showing. They can't show 2 times anymore. They can only show once.
Okay, well, to be devil's advocate,
wait. Because if I'm making a film and I have a distributor, they're trying to get as much money as we can for our film. I've made mine for $100,000 and it has a B-level actor. This other company made a film for $90,000 and they have a C-level actor. And we both have 2 showings. And the way that my film is going to make more money is if I use my leverage of having the B-list actor and having more leverage there to get 3 showings instead of 2. But that means the other independent film is going to get 1 showing instead of 2. You most likely are still going to take it because you want to try to get as much money as you can for your project. For Disney, it's, do we want to make 3 times the amount of money we put into this, or do we want to make 2 times the amount of money we put into this?
No, I completely understand.
Clearly they want to make 3 times the amount. If you had the capability of doing that most likely you'd probably take it too. And if not you personally, it'd be your distributor doing it. So just playing devil's advocate, I know it's
I
not
understand.
fair.
I will
know
just
it
say-
sucks. I'm just saying that is the business of it. And that is why it's really hard as an independent film to do a theatrical release at all. But if you can get that, you are going to have to struggle with competing against the bigger companies that have a lot more leverage, that can take away some of those screenings that you might have got because they have a film that they want to have shown more, and the theater has to allow it because they want that deal. So it's just.
And okay, I agree with that and I understand that. I will just say as a final argument, in my opinion, it all comes down to mismanagement and spending way too much money at the end of the day. Because I feel like yes, we know this. It's hard to make a film. And more often than not, they barely break even when they even do. So I can totally understand from the perspective of, we're trying to make as much money as humanly possible because this movie was expensive as hell to make. And we have to pay so many people and we spent hundreds of millions on this thing. And so, of course, they want to make as much money as possible. From a business standpoint, that makes complete sense. My argument is, I think that from reading the articles, from studying these past few months, especially, I just feel like the industry right now is spending crap loads of unnecessary money. They are managing it like horribly. And at the end of the day, they are trying to recoup as much as possible instead of actually focusing on making the money work and distributing it well. They're just throwing a crap ton of cash at it, and then trying to make it have as much results as possible at the end, instead of doing a good job with the money they have and recouping a good amount. That's just my. I'm not saying I don't understand completely. I'm just saying I think that plays a huge role into the desperation that these larger companies are having now to get it to as many places as possible, to make as much money as possible. I think it's, at the end of the day, partially mismanagement as well.
But yeah, there is it goes by seasons. So your arguments were, or your statements were that, like Disney, like, you're absolutely right. Disney companies like Disney they have a lot of leverage, but there's also a season. Like, if you ever noticed, like never, if you were to make a film, like never do a theater run in December, because Star Wars, there's always like a big July. There's always a big film in July. So
Wasn't it May? Like, didn't all the Marvel movies come out in May or March back in the day?
I think so. There's always a window where it's like, if you're a little guy, you don't want to go up against the bigger corporations, knowing that this is their season to do their
right. So, and so that would go back to the distributor, and hopefully they know, hopefully they know what they're doing. They're not just going to release it. They actually have a plan. And that's when you can have that in your contract of what the plan is, making sure that they have it, if you don't trust them to do it on their own. And
but what do you think?
That way they don't have to compete with Marvel's Avengers 4 or whatever comes out in the next summer, because then nobody's gonna go see your film. They might, but it's gonna be way less than if you're competing with February and January movies that usually don't have as many big blockbusters, because now the winter season is over.
Wait, what? Sorry?
For the January curse seasons is because my theory on that is like, okay, everybody says movies in January suck, which I'm more and more finding that to be true. But the one like are just like, my thing is, people underestimate the power of, not the power, but people underestimate time. So come January, I completely forgot. I saw Bad Boys 3 in January, and I completely forgot that I saw it. Like, I was like, oh my God, I did see this movie. And it felt like it was forever, but I was like, yo, that was this year. So that's the thing. You see it in January and you forget all about it come towards the end of the year. Like, you had forgotten it, which isn't what people want. They want you to talk about it for a while. And
that's why they release in the middle of the year, you think?
It's also because people are out of school and there's a lot more people that are able to do
Summer,
stuff.
yeah.
So it's, that factors in as well.
But what do you think of my money argument? Because I don't know, I've been giving this a lot of thought, and that's the thing, the what do you call it, common denominator that I see in all of these TV shows, movies. It's just a lot of money being thrown to the wall.
I don't think they're spending any money at all. Like, I kind of do agree with you at some point, because you got big companies like Disney. I'm like, Disney, you guys don't need commercials anymore. Everybody knows who Disney's are. So like, why are they even bothering to advertise their stuff? But they continue to do it. Every time I see a YouTube ad with Disney on it, I get pissed off. Like, well, why do we need to? Yeah, because it's like, I know, I'm aware. Who isn't aware of Disney's presence and existence?
I get it, Disney, you're everywhere, pretty much.
Why do we everywhere? So yeah, I agree with that aspect of it. But as far as like theatrical releases, not really. They don't really need theaters. I hate to say it, is like, everybody says theater is dead, but it kind of is. Like, they don't need
I think theater is dead for the casual viewer. I don't think it's dead for the movie lover or for the person that just wants to have like a date night or whatever.
Yeah, you're right. But that was the thing. Like before that, like that was it. Like that's all we had was theater. But now we have all these different platforms to get it out there. And I hate hearing people say, "Oh, I'll just wait till it's Netflix or It's like, nah, man. Well, not even that. Like when the pandemic hit, that changed everything, because it was now as we were relying on Netflix and Amazon Prime and all these other streaming platforms.
Yeah, before I used to consider Netflix like the made for TV place or whatever.
For like the thing was, it was like you had to wait for it to hit Netflix first, but the theater was like us. If you want to see it, you can come see it now, and or you wait till Netflix. But now it's like Netflix and the theater at the same time. So it's either or. You either buy your ticket or you pay for it, or not Netflix. I say Netflix, but like Prime or HBO.
All the streaming services, yeah.
Streaming services, like they're releasing it in theater and they're streaming it at the same time. So it's like you have a choice now. It's not like you can, force.
And not very many people will choose to go to the theater unless it's something they genuinely enjoy, or they want to make a day out of it, or it's a movie that warrants like the big screen and the big sound and all that.
Especially
right, and that's why independent films have a hard time even getting into theaters.
Yep,
and why those limited runs happen, and why it's limited to like a specific area or just a few theaters, because they want to try to make as much money as they can off of putting in as little money as they can possible.
Yeah, but that's why a movie like Everything Everywhere made so, like because it's so dynamic and visual and all this stuff, they were like, oh, this movie, that probably really helped it. People want to actually see it in theaters.
Yeah, but we had the pandemic, which would put a damper on things. But now we have these really high gas prices, so nobody even wants to go. So like now everybody's they're gonna start falling back. Now you're gonna start seeing these theater releases kind of like take a temper. Like Ghostbusters they postponed that for so long. They were like, it has to be this theater release. They didn't have to do that though. That was the thing. Like,
they wanted to make it an event.
Yeah,
I would assume. Yeah. Now here's the question, right? Is it still worth it if you are basically an independent filmmaker, making independent films? Would you say it is still worth it to try as hard as you can to get your film in theaters?
Yeah, for the experience, for the experience of saying you did that but like once you've done it, like second time around, maybe not. Like just to get experience with that and understanding how that platform works and how that business works. I definitely say go for it.
Or unless you think it's
I would say you should, but not at the expense of it being like more than it's worth. But I think you should, because you'll be taken more seriously. It'll be looked at like it's worth more. Things that made it to theater and people actually went to see, it's looked at like it's a more professional thing than it is.
Yeah.
So.
And also, there is an argument to be made that some movies benefit quite a lot from the bigger screen, from the surround sound, maybe not as many indie films, but I feel like it does add something to the experience, I would say.
Yeah, it does. It does. I can't argue that. Like I keep bringing it up now. Like every time I go to the theater, and it's like you got my attention, but sitting at home, it's like
Yeah.
my phone.
I've heard a lot of movie reviewers and people who do this for a living say that they will remember better the movie that they saw in theaters, no matter how crap it was, than the movie that they saw on streaming services. Like they've just noticed that lately.
The other thing is people usually look at things in theaters and it's, well, I mean, I don't know, it depends on how much you care about money, but even if it's worse, they typically look at it like it wasn't as bad because they just remember it being better, or it just seemed better because it was in
Of the
theaters.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, we gotta move on. But
I just thought that was an interesting thing to discuss.
yeah, and I would say, that's up to your distributor, and of course, like I said, devil's advocate, your distributor is gonna do the same exact thing if they can. It sucks, but that's just the way it is, and it makes sense because you want to make as much money for you as possible. And
I get it.
I'm just saying it to everybody. Like that's why it happens. The reason it's a huge problem now, and it wasn't back then, is because Disney is owning so much and so many of the largest franchises. So now it's a huge problem because they are the ones that have all those big names, where it used to be multiple companies competing for it. So they would maybe deliver the film at the same time, trying to compete with the other. Whereas now Disney's not going to do Star Wars and Marvel at the exact same time. They're going to try to divvy it with enough time in between so that they can get as much revenue from it as possible. And so it does change the game a bit, and it is unfair to a lot of independent filmmakers now because there's these mega corporations, and when there used to just be corporations. And so
I hope you understand my side too. I'm not villainizing, saying that they're all evil and every single person doing it is horrible. I'm just saying I think it's a little scummy because there's a difference between putting it in like more slots and taking up 90% of the slots. But I get it from a money standpoint.
So the problem also is that Disney makes all kind of movies, right? So the summer is what, 6 weeks, 7 weeks at the most, and they come up with one kids movie, adults movie, animation, all that. So it covers the whole.
Yeah, they can't be like, oh
summer.
well, I won't do a movie like this, or I won't compete with them. No, they make everything now. So
right. So that's also another thing, I think. So they'll occupy the whole theater.
Freaking market.
Yeah, right. All the different movies could go to all the different markets at the same time if they wanted. So, this is the family movie we have out now, and this is for the more adult side, and this is for the Marvel fans, and this is for these fans, and yeah. So it is tough, and that's why you're seeing less and less independent films make it to theaters, because it's just not easy, and it's expensive, and it's hard to get noticed and people interested in seeing it because, like Priscilla said, there's not really too much visual effects and stuff to like go see and be in awe of at the theater for an independent film usually, because they're just not made with as big a budget, so they can't have those really gorgeous settings and scenic looks and these crazy battles and all this stuff. So
I would say though, I feel like that's when you market your distribution as your advertising well, because yes, if you don't have that to work with, if you don't have the cute, like the effects and the stuff, the pyrotechnics and all that, you can get people passionate about your story or wanting to support you as a filmmaker. And that's where I feel like advertising is important, because they might not come for the big pyrotechnics and special effects, but they might come because they saw your advertisement and they were like, you know what, this seems cool, like I want to support this, I want to support this independent film, I want to support this creator. Creating somewhat of a, not parasocial relationship, but creating a relationship with your viewers and with the people that would that like this kind of stuff, I feel like that is more important now than ever, because a lot of people will support people that they like, companies that they like, that they think are worth what do you call it? Worth supporting.
Yeah, definitely. And that's where in those distribution deals, the distributor might not do very much marketing and advertising, where it's all going to be on you. So that's also something you want to kind of think about. And that is all of it goes back to, what does this distributor distribute? What are they good at? Maybe they're great at sci-fi for video on demand distribution, but that's it. They might not be good with other genres, and they might not be good with theater releases and all that. So that is why you want to look into it beforehand and try to divvy up and split those rights as much as you can to maximize your gains, your returns, maximize your marketing from these different companies, marketing in different areas, so that you can get your target audience as best as you can.
I would say work on yourself, your personal brand as well, because people like supporting people that they like people that are likable or people that are approachable. So if I know that that's hard for some people, like I know I talk a lot, but I don't really like having much of a public presence, because I don't know, I'm kind of shy in people I don't know. And so I don't know if I'd be very good at having like a public persona or presence, or trying to create buzz for my film that way. But some people are like, work with your strengths. If you have a cinematographer that's very likable or dynamic, or, work with your strengths. An actor, get them to do some promo work, maybe like film some stuff for the advertisements, and just them sitting down, talking about the movie, talking about why they're passionate about it. Get creative in that aspect. I feel like is really cool, and a really dynamic and good way to get people to care and see your stuff.
A couple of things I think I wanted to mention is that, a couple of things I want to mention is that if you're a filmmaker, it's by default, you have to promote it.
Yeah.
You cannot afford to be shy. Let me put it that way, right?
But that's why I'm in the production side of things.
Yeah, so you have to get out of your comfort zone and basically get up there and do it. Because if you don't do it, nobody else is going to do it for you.
I've gotten a lot better at that.
So the production side of things is sort of marketing.
No, that's what I was
going to say. I was going to say. Or a production.
I was going to say, actually, no, I do need to talk to people a lot. And I've gotten a lot better at that. In the beginning, it was horrible. And I was like, I can't do this. I thought it was just paperwork. But the more that I see, like, oh, no, I do have to talk to people, and I do have to be like this and that.
Right.
And so,
and the other,
yeah,
so that's there, I think, extremely important part of your, because you might have to go on TV, you might have to go on YouTube, being interviewed and promoting your stuff, having your actors in there. So it's like the whole game, right? It's a whole end game that you have. Right.
Yeah.
So I think what I wanted to mention was, it is hard, but yeah.
You learn it. You learn it the hard way, but it's scary.
Right. Yeah. So the other thing which I wanted to mention was that I usually, speak to people about why they went for the movie, right? Whichever movie they want, and it's usually like the demographics, different demographics. And I was particularly speaking to people who are younger audience, like 20, 20 plus. I think the movie market is predominantly targeted to age group of about 14 to 25. That seems like the statistics of it.
That sounds accurate.
So I was talking to a few people, and there were two movies, right? So there was one movie which was like a story, plain simple story, movie, drama. So I asked, are you going to watch this movie? And they said, no, we're going to watch it on, when it comes online. So next time there was some movie, and I said, how come you went and watched this movie? And they said, oh, we like the special effects, which this movie had. So, it seems like there is a mentality out there that okay, if it's a story movie, plain movie, we can always catch it online. But if there is a
Yep.
special effects, it's like we have to be at the theater and enjoy that, which
To
we just kind of
experience
seems
it the best way.
Especially because movies
Right.
are expensive now too. Going to the theater is really pricey
Right.
compared to what it was a few years ago. So I feel like that's another
yeah,
thing. Like,
$30.
oh,
I mean, you get a popcorn and a drink. It's about $30, $35, somewhere around there for each
yeah,
individual
even
person.
if you sneak in some stuff like I used to when I was young, it's still about like 15 to 20 bucks per person, depending. So yeah, it's a lot. So I can also understand the idea of, oh, well, I'm only going to go watch a movie in theaters if it's actually something that makes a difference in a big screen or in a big surround sound. I can understand that.
All right. So what was I saying?
Distribution.
Yes. I was gonna say something if I forgot. Anyway, who cares? Anyway, so moving on. So that should be in the contract of how they plan to execute this vision, unless you just trust them to do it. If you want to set terms for the limited release, or however they do the plan, it would need to be in the contract. But I believe for the most part, you kind of just leave it up to the distributor, unless you specifically mark out what they are going to do to release this film, like if they're doing a theatrical release, what their plan is. And you might ask them questions about what their plan is and want to see a marketing plan before you sign the contract. But I don't believe in the contract itself they usually have the plan in there of like, this is exactly how it has to go, because they need to be able to be adaptable to certain circumstances and situations. So they don't want it marked in a contract that they have to do this step by step. And so I think it really depends on what kind of deal you have and what contract it has. But the limited release thing is just so they can see if there's interest, and if there's not, they may decide not to have it. And that may be in the contract of like, we're going to try it to this amount of market, and then if it works, we're going to spread it out to the whole United States, or multiple countries. But if not, then we're not going to release it anywhere else. And so you have to check your contracts out and see. Entertainment lawyers and stuff can really help you out with that if you're able to get one, like I keep saying. But that's how that, I believe that's how that usually goes. With distributor and sales agent fees, this is from StephenFollows.com, STEPHEN follows.com. Average sales agent and producer rep fees are about 19% for commission. Producer reps might get a upfront fee instead of a percentage, or they might get a smaller percentage and an upfront fee. But a sales agent typically gets the revenue on the back end, a commission percentage, and it's usually averagely around 19%, they say on this website anyway. Average international distributors are about 27%. Average US distributors are about 30%. International, as in if you aren't in the US, that is, the typical fee you will be charged, I believe, because I'm pretty sure international is charged more. I've heard from many other sources say international distribution, like if you are in this country and you are trying to get international distribution, they take out a much larger fee than a local distribution company that's going to distribute locally, because it's a lot more expensive. They have to do a lot more agreements. They have to work with a bunch more companies because they're going to be doing it in many different territories, many different countries. So they have to make a new deal for each country, typically speaking, to release it all over the place. If they are doing video on demand releases in specific regions, and theatrical, especially in specific locations. So I've heard international distributors, if you are in the United States and you're getting international distribution, the typical fee they give is about 25 to 45%. And from other sources, I've heard the United States distributor locally that's going to do it either theatrically or video on demand or whatever, they take about 15 to 35%. So if any local one's trying to take like 50 to 60%, you know, obviously that's like a red flag, and you want to just check out other distributors around your area. If they're doing the same kind of distribution, you know, if they specialize in video on demand, and so does this other company, compare what their fees are and make sure you're getting a good deal. Because maybe in that area, for some reason, for independent films, they do charge about 50% just because multitude of reasons. And so all the companies around you charge that much. So it might just be, that's just what you're going to have to do. That's the deal you're going to have to make. Whereas they might just be a company that's trying to get a huge amount of the revenue, when another company would charge half the price or 30% compared to 50% or something crazy like that. So cinema and movie theater commission is usually about 44% of ticket sales, according to StephenFollows.com. And again, from other sources, I've heard 15 to 25% for sales agents. I haven't really heard for cinema and movie theater, but I think that's about right. Usually what happens with a movie theater is they have less of the ticket sales in the beginning. And then as time goes on, they get more and more percentage of the ticket sales the longer they keep it in the theater. And that's to give a reason for the theater to want to keep this movie in their theaters for a really long time, because they're going to end up getting, you know, maybe 80% after 2 months instead of having 20 or 30% or 40% in the beginning, you know. And so that's a bigger cut for them to keep it going, because that opening weekend, that first 3 weeks, like Vish was saying, like those are the most important times for the film. And that's typically because that's when the actual film is going to make the most money, the filmmakers, the producers, because the theater won't be making as much. And it's also the time that the most people are going to go see the film. If they're excited for a film to come out, they might go opening weekend. And if they just like, if they're not as excited, but they're kind of like, oh, this is getting good reviews, they might see it within the next few weeks when they have time. So that's typically the window of time that you get for a theater. So the percentage is a varying deal depending on how long they plan to keep that movie in the theater for, and whatever deal they come up with. It's usually less up front, less at the start for the theater, and then more as time goes on. All right, moving on from that, we're talking about PMDs. PMDs, it stands for Producers of Marketing and Distribution. This comes from nofilmschool.com. A PMD should start early on a film. They are in charge of the strategies and process of distribution and marketing. From filmcampaign.org, responsibilities for PMDs are audience engagement, distribution strategy, marketing budget, fundraising, publicity, social media, outreach through organizations, crowdsourcing, website and transmedia supervision, sponsorship, and more. PMDs are a relatively new position within the last decade or so. Independent distributor actually coined the term, so it's not really used on professional high budget projects because they don't really need this position, I don't think, unless it's starting to be used recently. I've never even heard of this until I started looking into it. And what it sounds like is that more independent productions have started using this term because of the new way that you have to distribute and market yourself to get the film bought by a distributor, because there's so much extra films out there. There's so much to choose from for the distributor, and they have so many things that they're not going out and looking for it anymore. They're not just picking it up from the festivals anymore like they used to. Some don't even go to festivals anymore. They just have enough submissions coming in to where they can work from their offices. So it really depends now on knowing all of these different ways to get your film sold. And that is why the independent distributors thought it would be a good idea to make a specific position for it, so that schools could start training people how to do this and teaching them what their job responsibilities are. If you give something a title, people take it more seriously, and all these things, so that there could be someone specifically knowing what they're doing and learning and figuring out how to do the marketing and distributing to help sell this independent film. PMDs, it sounds like they're only used on independent productions because it's a pretty new job position created by independent filmmakers, distributors, to get a position dedicated to marketing and distribution strategies. So because this job title is new and used on independent sets, just be sure the person who is claiming to be one, if you're trying to hire one, make sure the person knows what they're doing and that they know what their responsibilities are. Because it's a new title, somebody might call themselves that, but they've only ever done it for one film, or they've only ever advertised on Facebook, and so now they're calling themselves a producer of marketing and distribution, but they don't really know what all that's supposed to entail.
Yeah, me and Coda were having that discussion the other day, because I was like, well, I feel like this also would, I understand that some new positions are definitely necessary, especially in the indie scene, but I would also say, depending on who you're pitching it to, you might want to, because just because we want a position to be a thing doesn't make it a thing. And just because it's a thing in the indie scene does not mean it's a thing in the larger production scene. So I would say, in my opinion, just try to adapt your approach depending on who you're pitching it to, who you're discussing. If you have to explain your job function, if you ask them to maybe explain their job function a little better, so that it doesn't seem like if it's a bigger production and they don't know about this, it doesn't seem like you just came up with it out of nowhere and they have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, so I would say because it came from a man named John Rice, I believe is Rice, one way to say his name, because he's an independent distributor, so he distributes independent films, and because he was seeing that there was a lot of extra work most independent filmmakers didn't know how to do, or they just didn't want to do when it came to marketing and distributing their films. He decided that it would probably be best to make a position for it, so that the filmmakers can decide if they want to hire somebody that knows how to do it instead of having to do it all themselves, and so that they can have somebody that knows how to do these things and can walk them through it. Because, as an independent distributor, he didn't want all these independent filmmakers coming to him and not having a clue what they needed to do, not having a clue what kind of deliverables they needed to give him. And so making a position like that and spreading it out to other independent distributors, because he's in connection with other people. Hey, we're trying to create this new position so that people can be trained in it, and it can hopefully get set in with the professionals, so that this can actually be a real job function.
But as a skeptical person, I was like, well, is this like someone who calls himself a coach but doesn't know exactly what that even means? So with the research, I understood that it is actually something, and it is actually becoming a bigger thing in the indie scene. But I would also say, be careful who you're pitching it to, approaching and explaining your job function or their job function, and make sure that the person you're hiring that says that they are this, like Coda says, actually knows what they're doing, and isn't just because they thought it was interesting and people didn't quite know what it meant, so he thought that he could get away with having that job. New jobs are tricky. New positions are tricky.
Yeah, and this isn't the only new job that's been created for films. Film's always adapting and evolving, and new titles are made. It just takes a while for them to be implemented across the board. So this could be implemented across the board. It could already be starting to be. I've never really heard it from anyone bigger than independent films, but it could be starting to catch on. I'm just not entirely sure. But anyway, this comes from screendaily.com. He lists, so this is John Rice again, or John Reese. He lists the responsibilities of a producer of marketing and distribution as identify and engage the audience for a film. So figure out what the target market is, the demographic that's going to watch this film, and engage with them through social media. You know, they could be posting memes, they could be doing whatever, stuff like that, to try to build an audience before the films even come out. Development of a distribution and marketing strategy and planning for a film in conjunction with the entire team. So making sure that, you know, they have a plan for how they're going to distribute and market this thing, and they're talking with the director, the producer, whoever else, to make sure everybody's in agreement with what the plan is and how they're going to go about getting this film noticed, getting it sold, and where they're going to market it to, who they're going to try to distribute it with, what the distribution plan is, and what all the deliverables they're going to try to get done during production. All that kind of stuff is going to be stuff that they're coming up with. Creating a budget for that plan. So then they're also creating a budget for how much is this all going to cost? How much money are we going to put into marketing and distribution? And then getting that approved by the producer or the executive producer. They assemble and supervise the necessary team and crew to carry out that plan. So, you know, they might hire some assistants and some people dedicated solely to social media so that they can have an engagement every single day or every week or whatever, and just like create some stuff that's going to gain some traction and get people interested, and they'll make sure that's within that budget. Audience outreach through organizations, blogs, social networking, online radio, etc. So that would be like going around and doing interviews and talking about the film, and if it has anything to do with any kind of organization, trying to get some outreach through them so that people can really, if it's a Christian film, trying to get in touch with a bunch of churches that their denomination goes with whatever the film is, and explaining what the film is and getting them to kind of promote it through their church or their website or whatever, so that they can reach out to
I don't
more
know if the
people.
same thing would apply for like synagogues or stuff like that, but that could also work too.
Right, just
if
any kind of,
it's-
or just organizations as like Organization for the Blind and people with disabilities. If your film's about something like that, then you might try to get an organization like that to represent you a little bit, or outreach.
Or to
other
just spread
people.
the word, since they are, you know, more in touch with the community, and they could, you know, introduce you to some people or spread the word a little bit more among the people, and they could support it.
Right. And then they will also be supervising the creation of promotional and transmedia elements, including the film's website, like the script on the website, whatever the blogs or whatever you have on your website is saying, to help represent it as best as they can. And any concepts for transmedia production, like production stills, video assets, both behind the scenes and promotional copies and art. All of those elements they'll be overseeing. Anything that's going to be used for distribution or marketing, trying to get a distribution deal, they'll be supervising and overseeing the creation of all of those. So that could be your artwork, your poster, that kind of stuff, trailer, and they'll be overseeing all that. They also might outreach to potential distribution and marketing partners, such as sponsors, promotional partners, various distribution entities, publicists, and they'll supervise the creation of deliverables. So they'll know what deliverables are needed, and they will make sure they're getting created. So it's a relatively new position. Keep that in mind. But it is getting more and more important now that there's an overabundance of films being made. On the independent side, it's hard to get distribution already. And so setting yourself apart by having someone that already knows the ins and outs, have prepared for it, and are solely focused on those things, because that's why a new job is created, so that somebody can focus on one thing. Same reason why you might want to get multiple distributors, so they can focus on one market. You might want to hire a PMD or, let somebody be one so that they're focused solely on how are we going to market this? How are we going to distribute it? How are we going to grow an audience before we even try to sell this thing? And, what's the plan to get everything we can get ready before we go to try to get distribution? Does anyone have any questions, comments, anything to ask or whatever for PMDs, producers of marketing and distribution?
Brian, did you want to say something earlier? Because I feel like I cut you off. Right?
All right, moving on from that. So the last thing we're talking about is what is called aggregators. This stuff comes from rapbook.com. It's in the syllabus, letter C. Actually, the other stuff was in the syllabus too. If you go to the websites in the syllabus, you'll see all the websites I'm talking about in the meeting. But anyway, rapbook.com under aggregators. Film aggregators are a third-party company that can help you get your movie, short, or series distributed on platforms like Google Play, Sony PlayStation Network, and all the other video-on-demand platforms. Some aggregators help with the encoding process and with creating assets like subtitles and dubbing for the film. The difference between aggregators and distributors is that distributors control all of the distribution, as many rights as you'll give them, and usually help or control the marketing as well. Film aggregators typically only aid in getting the film ready and posted to different video-on-demand services. With a distributor, you may have in-depth conversations about the film's goals, where with aggregators, you won't. Their only strategy and service is to get your film on platforms. They don't come up with a plan or anything to try to market it and get an audience. Their only goal is to try to get it on these video platforms. It's all up to you to get the word out there. Whereas a distributor, depending on what kind of deal you're making, what kind of distributor you're working with, some do, some don't, market the film and help to try to spread the word as much as possible so they can make their bigger commission. Or they can make a commission, but they'll get more money coming in. So they'll have more money coming from that commission, that percentage of the profits, of the revenue. You usually will pay aggregators differently based on the specific one you are dealing with. So there are different aggregators that will have different kinds of deals. Some charge for their services up front. You might pay them a few $1,000s or more, maybe $100,000, depending on how big they are, how well established they are, and how much your film is worth. And you'll keep 100% of the revenue. So you pay them up front, out of pocket, but then they don't take anything on the back end. They just post it to they get it on as many of the platforms as they can. And then the rest goes to you after that, if anybody watches the film or pays for it or whatever. Some will share a percentage of the film's profit. So it'll be kind of the same as a distributor. They'll take a commission fee for the film's revenue. They'll take a percentage out of it. But typically it's going to be a lot less than a distributor. It's going to be around 10% instead of like 25 to 35% like a distributor would get, because they're doing a lot less work. So they don't take as much money from out of it. And that, of course, that's after their expenses get paid in full. So if they are working on anything, if they do the artwork and stuff like that, they'll also take out their expenses before giving you money. So same thing as a distributor in a way for that. The other thing, they might do a hybrid of both, where you pay some upfront fees and they get a smaller percentage of the profits. So you pay half as much as you would to another one, but we'll take 5% instead of 10, whatever kind of deal like that. So it could be paying them up front, or they get all the money off the back end of revenue, or they get a mixture of both. The rapbook.com says to ask one of their reps, one of the aggregators reps, how they handle client royalties. If it's not in a separate account, that's a red flag. So you always want them to have a separate account for any money that's coming in for your project, because that'll make sure they are accounting it properly. And that way they give you all the fair share of the amount of money that you're supposed to get. Whereas if they're putting it into the same account that they have with the rest of their business, it can get kind of muddy and unclear where that money's coming from, if it's from your film or if it's from another, or if it's from some other avenue of revenue they're getting. And then they might not pay you as much because it's all getting mixed together, and it's a little more unclear and their accounting's not perfect. So you want to try to make sure they have it in a separate account. Otherwise, it can be seen as a red flag. Also, I'd say, just like with distributors, you want to set a cap on the amount of expenses they can incur. You want to make sure that they're not going to try to do so many expenses that you'll never see money coming in. Just like with a distributor, set some kind of cap on it. Just do your research and figure out how much those things are going to cost, and then set a cap that you think is reasonable. Aggregators can help get films onto platforms that you otherwise might not get access to. They take a fee, but a much smaller fee than distributors. So if your goal is to keep the most amount of money earned, then aggregators with an upfront fee may be the way to go. But if you want to generate buzz and help your resume for your next project, then sales agents or distributors may be the way to go, because they'll help get your name out there. They'll help get your film out there, and they might even drive in more revenue because of it. But it's also more expenses on their end. So you might not see as much money coming in from that revenue because it's going to them for them paying it all out to advertising. But the bigger it gets, and the more money it makes, the more likely you have a better chance of getting funded for your next project. So if that's what you're looking for, distributors and sales agents are probably better. Whereas aggregators, if you just want to like get on Redbox on demand, they'll be the way to go, because you can't, most of the time for those more professional platforms, you can't just get on there by directly contacting them. Usually the aggregators, just like distributors, just like producers reps, they all have relationships with all these companies, and they can get you in to these places that you otherwise couldn't. Some aggregators are Quiver, Bitmax, and Film Hub. Also, unlike distributors, aggregators often don't take an ownership stake in the film. So after you pay them the fee, they don't own any rights to your film anymore. They're just posting it onto these platforms as much as they can. I've also read that some of them are just like, you kind of just put it into because there's those websites like Quiver, Bitmax, and Film Hub. Some of the aggregators are just like you putting the film onto their website, and it's kind of like a marketplace in the way that a distributor goes there and sees what they want to buy and put on their platform, and then buys it from the website, and you get the money, instead of them like actually reaching out to the other companies. So you also want to look into the aggregator and how they work. Some of them just have a website and say, come to us, distributors, and buy from us what you want. Other ones will actually try to put more effort into reaching out to distributors and platforms to get it ready to go onto those video on demand platforms. So yeah, if you have a distributor, they're going to do the work of the aggregator plus more, but they're going to take out a bigger fee and probably incur some more expenses, because they're going to be working on trailers and artwork and whatever else, if that's not a deliverable that they tell you need to give them. Whereas aggregators, they're not going to do anything other than video on demand, first of all. So if you're trying to do theatrical release, you can't do an aggregator with that. They're only for video on demand. So home release, theatrical release, even some international distribution stuff, aggregators aren't always going to be your go-to for that, well, at all. But for international, some of them can do international stuff. Just depends which one you go with. But distributors and sales agents are international, producers reps are local, and they do like pretty much the same type of work. And then a distributor is the one who actually gets it onto to the clients by posting it out to people and everything like that. So does anyone have any questions or comments? Anything to add for aggregators? Also heard like from different filmmakers say different things about it. So I've heard people say you don't need them. You know, it's better off to just go at it alone. You're going to get more money from it because their upfront fee is going to just be more expensive than they're worth. And I've heard other people say you definitely need one. You know, you're not gonna be able to do it without them. If all you're trying to do is get on video on demand platforms, then, you know, definitely go with them. So I'd say it really just depends on what you're looking to do and which aggregator you're trying to go with. But just like with all the rest of the stuff, look them up, make sure that they pay on time, that they don't mix their money, that they don't do anything sketchy. You know, that they're a legitimate company that's going to pay out what they owe, and they're not going to try to fumble the books or do some accounting tricks to try to rob you of money pretty much. So that's some stuff to look out for with any of these companies and any of these agreements that you're doing. The other thing about it is, of course, aggregators are going to have dozens, hundreds, maybe thousands of films that they might not have sold yet because they're just putting it out there. And so they aren't as focused as distributors. And that's another reason why distributors will make a more of a profit. They'll have a bigger fee because they are putting more work. Typically, if it's a good distributor, they're putting more work into marketing your specific project. Whereas aggregators are just kind of like, here's what we got, here's all of it. Our platform has hundreds of titles, pick what you want. So that's also something to think about. Depends on what you want to do for the most part. All right, guys. Last thing I'll say is Monday, we're going to talk about how to write a TV show. We're not going to go over everything, just mainly the differences between writing for TV compared to writing for film, and like how it's structured and stuff like that. How money is distributed in filmmaking. Talking about the back end. So if you are doing theatrical release, the waterfall, how the money flows from top to bottom, how many things it goes through before it gets to you, and something called Hollywood accounting, which can be a very tricky way of accounting to get you out of your money. So we'll talk about that, just so you have something to be aware of. And then theatrical release terminology, talk about some of that stuff, like if it has legs, so that, you know, that means, can it stand on its own? Can it stand for a long time? You know, the what am I trying to say? The first weekend it comes out, the premiere of it, of course, and then, you know, just all these other terminologies and what they mean to a theater's release. So if you're going for a theatrical release, you kind of know the language, so you know what the distributor is going to go for. And then multicam and single cam setups for TV and how they differ. And we'll talk a little bit more about that if there's any new information there, because we've already kind of gone over that in a little bit. All right, guys, I hope you all have a good night. Thanks for coming. Thanks for sticking around to the end. Hopefully see you guys all Monday. Have a good weekend.
Bye, guys. Have a good weekend.